Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. It was a quiet evening, and I was home alone. My kids were at their father's for the weekend. I was enjoying the peace and catching up on some reading when the doorbell rang. It was already dark outside, and the rain was coming down hard. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I figured it might be a delivery I forgot about. I opened the door to find a man standing there, drenched from the rain. He looked worried and said his car broke down a few blocks away. He asked if he could use my phone to call for help. I hesitated for a moment but then figured he seemed harmless enough and let him in. He stepped inside, dripping water everywhere, and I handed him my phone. He dialed a number and started talking to someone, but I noticed he wasn't really saying much. Just fake answers and nodding his head. Something felt off. When he hung up, he thanked me and said the tow truck would be here soon. I offered him a towel and some tea to warm up, trying to be polite. He accepted the towel but declined the tea. He just stood there, looking around my house, making me more uncomfortable by the second. I asked him if he wanted to wait outside since the rain had eased up a bit. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, and said he'd rather stay inside until help arrived. That's when my alarm bells really started ringing. I excused myself to the kitchen, pretending to check on something, and grabbed my phone to call the police, but the line was dead. Panic started to set in. I went back to the living room, trying to stay calm. I told him I needed to check something upstairs and would be right back. He just nodded and kept looking around. I rushed upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom. I tried calling the police again, but my phone still wasn't working. I heard footsteps on the stairs. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I looked around for something to defend myself with and grabbed a heavy lamp. The footsteps got closer, and then I heard him trying the doorknob. It was locked, but that didn't make me feel any safer. "Is everything okay in there?" he called through the door. His voice was different now, colder. I didn't answer. I moved quietly to the window and saw his car parked across the street, not broken down at all. The doorknob rattled again, harder this time. I knew I had to get out of there. I opened the window as quietly as I could and climbed out onto the roof. The rain was slick and cold, but I didn't care. I had to get away. I made my way to the edge of the roof and climbed down the trellis. My heart was racing, and my hands were shaking, but I managed to get to the ground without making too much noise. I ran to the neighbor's house, praying they were home. I banged on their door, and thankfully, they answered. I told them everything, and they called the police for me. We stayed inside, waiting for the cops to arrive. I kept looking out the window, terrified that he would find me. The police showed up within minutes, but it felt like hours. They went to my house and found him still inside, rummaging through my things. They arrested him, and I finally felt a wave of relief wash over me. Turns out, he had a record and was wanted for several break-ins in the area. I was just lucky he hadn't hurt me. The police said I did the right thing by getting out of there and calling for help. It took me a long time to feel safe in my own home again. I changed the locks, got a security system, and always double-check everything before opening the door. I'll never forget how close I came to something much worse happening. Now, whenever I hear the doorbell ring, I think twice before opening the door. You never know who might be on the other side. I was driving home late one night after a long day at work. The highway was almost empty, just a few cars here and there. It was pitch dark, and I was looking forward to getting home and getting some sleep. I noticed a car behind me, a black sedan, that seemed to be following me for miles. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but as I kept driving, the car stayed right behind me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe they were just going in the same direction. But it was hard to ignore. Every turn I made, they made. I even changed lanes a few times, but the car did the same. My heart started to race, and I felt a knot in my stomach. I decided to stop at a rest area, thinking I might be overreacting. I could get a drink, take a break, and see if they would just drive past. I pulled into the rest area, and to my dismay, the black sedan pulled in right after me. I parked my car and watched in my rearview mirror as the driver got out. He was a tall, burly man with a scruffy beard and a worn-out jacket. He started walking towards my car. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I locked my doors and tried to act normal, but inside I was panicking. He reached my window and knocked on it. I rolled it down just a crack, enough to hear him but not enough for him to reach in. "Hey, you," he shouted, his voice rough and angry. "Why have you been following me?" I was stunned. "Following you? You've been following me," I replied, my voice trembling. He looked taken aback for a second, then his expression turned even more hostile. "Don't play dumb with me," he growled. "I know what you did. You think you can just drive away and get away with it?" I had no idea what he was talking about. "I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't done anything. I'm just trying to get home." He didn't seem to believe me. He banged his fist on my car, making me jump. "Get out of the car," he demanded. "We need to talk." There was no way I was getting out of my car. I shook my head and tried to stay calm. "I'm not getting out. If you have something to say, you can say it right here." His face twisted with rage. "Get out of the car now, or I'll make you." He reached for the door handle, but luckily, it was locked. I knew I had to get out of there fast. I started the car and backed out of the parking spot, my hands shaking. He was shouting something, but I couldn't hear him over the sound of my own heartbeat. I put the car in drive and sped out of the rest area, glancing in the mirror to see him running after me. I drove as fast as I could, my eyes constantly checking the mirror to see if he was following me. Thankfully, I didn't see the black sedan anymore. I kept driving, not daring to stop until I reached a more populated area. I finally pulled into a gas station that was brightly lit and had a few people around. I parked and took a moment to catch my breath, my hands still trembling. I called the police and told them what happened. They took my information and said they would send someone to check the rest area, but I didn't have much hope they would find him. I just wanted to get home and put this terrifying experience behind me. I finally made it home, still shaken but relieved to be safe. I double-checked all the locks and tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw his angry face and heard his threats. It took a long time for me to feel safe driving at night again. When I first moved into the apartment, everything seemed perfect. It was a quiet building with friendly neighbors. One of them, a guy named Steve, lived right next door. He was in his late 30s, always smiling, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. At first, I thought it was nice to have someone so welcoming. We started with small talk in the hallway. He would ask about my day, my job, and little things like that. After a week, he invited me over for a beer. We talked about sports, movies, and other regular stuff. He seemed normal, maybe a bit too curious, but I didn't think much of it. It felt good to have a friend in a new place. Then, things started to get weird. He began asking more personal questions. At first, it was about my family and friends, then about my routines and habits. He would comment on things that I never told him. Like, one day he mentioned how I leave for work around 8 a.m. and come back by 6 p.m. It was odd, but I brushed it off as him being observant. One evening, I came home and found Steve waiting outside my door. He said he needed to borrow some sugar. It was strange because he had never asked for anything before. I gave him the sugar and thought that would be the end of it. But the next day, I noticed my kitchen window was slightly open. I always kept it closed. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to convince myself it was nothing. A few days later, I lost my keys. I was sure I left them on the kitchen counter. I looked everywhere but couldn't find them. Steve showed up again, offering to help. He seemed overly eager, which made me uncomfortable. I thanked him but said I would manage. That night, I found the keys in my bathroom sink. I knew I didn't put them there. It felt like someone was messing with me. The final straw was when I came home early from work one day. I found Steve in my apartment. He was standing in my living room, looking through my mail. I was furious and demanded to know what he was doing. He smiled and said he was just checking if I received a package he was expecting. I knew it was a lie. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a surge of fear. I told him to leave and never come back. He left without arguing, but his smile stayed with me. I decided it was time to get out of there. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing noises and imagined Steve creeping around outside. The next morning, I called my landlord and told him I needed to move out immediately. I didn't explain much, just that I felt unsafe. The landlord was understanding and said he would help me find another place. I started packing right away. While I was packing, I noticed more things out of place. Drawers slightly open, items moved. It was clear Steve had been in my apartment more times than I realized. On my last night in the apartment, I barricaded the door with a chair. I didn't want to take any chances. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside my door. My heart raced as I listened to the slow, deliberate steps. They stopped right outside my door, and I held my breath, praying he wouldn't try to get in. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved away. The next morning, I left as soon as it was light. I moved into a new place across town, making sure Steve wouldn't know where I went. I changed my routine, my phone number, and even my job to stay out of his reach. The experience left me paranoid, always looking over my shoulder and double-checking locks. It's been months now, and I haven't seen or heard from Steve. I still think about that smile and how close he got to me without my realizing it. I decided to take a weekend trip into the woods for some peace and quiet. The stress from work had been piling up, and I needed to clear my mind. I chose a spot deep in the forest, far from the usual camping areas, to ensure I wouldn't be disturbed. I set up my tent, started a small fire, and settled in for the night, feeling a bit nervous but mostly excited about the solitude. The first night was uneventful. I fell asleep to the sounds of crickets and the crackling of the fire. But the second night, things changed. I was lying in my tent, trying to sleep, when I heard the first noise. It was a faint rustling, like someone or something was moving through the underbrush. I sat up, straining my ears, but it stopped. I told myself it was just an animal and tried to go back to sleep. A few minutes later, I heard it again, closer this time. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps. My heart started racing. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it around inside the tent, trying to see if there was any shadow or movement outside. The footsteps stopped again. I sat there, holding my breath, listening. Then, the zipper of my tent started to move. Slowly, someone was trying to open it. Panic surged through me. I didn't have a weapon, just a small camping knife that wouldn't do much against an intruder. I knew I had to get out of there, but I didn't know how many people were out there or what they wanted. I grabbed my backpack, which I always kept packed with essentials, and quietly unzipped the back of the tent. I slipped out and started running into the woods, away from the firelight. The darkness was overwhelming, and I could barely see where I was going, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. As I ran, I could hear the footsteps behind me, faster now, pursuing. Whoever it was, they were chasing me. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running. After what felt like hours, I saw a light through the trees. I headed towards it, hoping it was another camper or a ranger station. As I got closer, I realized it was a small cabin. I pounded on the door, yelling for help. There was no answer, but the door was unlocked. I burst inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it. The cabin was empty, but it seemed like someone had been there recently. There was a half-eaten meal on the table and a fire still smoldering in the fireplace. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the door handle, then looked for something to defend myself with. I found a heavy iron poker by the fireplace and gripped it tightly, my hands shaking. I heard the footsteps outside the cabin, circling it. Whoever it was, they were still looking for me. I could hear them trying the windows, testing the door. I stayed as quiet as I could, barely breathing, praying they would give up and leave. Hours passed. The footsteps finally faded, but I didn't move. I stayed there all night, clutching the poker, my eyes wide open, staring at the door. As dawn broke, I finally felt safe enough to move. I peeked out the window and saw no one. The forest was quiet again. I left the cabin, keeping the poker with me, and made my way back to my campsite. My tent was slashed, my belongings scattered. I grabbed what I could and headed back to the trailhead, constantly looking over my shoulder. When I finally reached my car, I threw my things in the back and sped away, my hands still shaking. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, where I called the police. They took my statement and said they would investigate, but I never heard anything more about it. I haven't been back to the woods since. The peace and quiet I wanted so badly turned into a nightmare I'll never forget. Every evening when I walked home from work, I noticed a man staring at me from across the street. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. People look at other people all the time, right? But after a week, it became clear that this wasn't just random. He was always there, same time, same place, just staring. He never smiled or waved, just watched. It was creepy, but I told myself not to worry. I lived in a busy neighborhood, and nothing bad had ever happened to me there. I kept my head down and hurried home, trying to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of my neck every time I passed him. One Friday evening, it was darker than usual, and the streets were quieter. As I walked past his usual spot, I noticed he wasn't there. Relief washed over me, and I quickened my pace, eager to get home. But as I turned the corner to my building, I saw him again, leaning against the wall, staring right at me. I froze for a moment, then forced myself to keep walking. I could feel his eyes following me. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled with my keys, finally getting the door open. I glanced back and saw him crossing the street, heading straight for me. Panic set in. I rushed inside and slammed the door shut, leaning against it, trying to catch my breath. I ran up the stairs to my apartment on the 3rd floor. I locked the door behind me and went straight to the window. Peeking through the blinds, I saw him standing outside, looking up at the building. He had followed me. He knew where I lived. Fear gripped me. What did he want? Why was he following me? I didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise made me jump. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That a man was staring at me? That he followed me home? They would probably tell me there was nothing they could do. The next day, I decided to change my routine. I left work earlier, hoping to avoid him. It worked for a few days, but then he was there again, waiting for me. This time, I didn't go straight home. I walked past my building and went to a nearby cafe. I sat there for hours, watching the door, waiting to see if he would come in. He didn't, but when I finally left, he was there, across the street, watching. I couldn't live like this. I felt trapped in my own home, scared to go outside. I needed to do something. I decided to confront him. Maybe if I showed him I wasn't afraid, he would leave me alone. The next evening, I saw him in his usual spot. I walked straight up to him, my hands shaking, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "Why are you following me?" I demanded. He just stared at me, not saying a word. Up close, he looked even more menacing. His eyes were cold and empty. He didn't answer. He just kept staring. "Leave me alone," I said, louder this time. People on the street were starting to look. "I'm calling the police if you don't stop." He smirked then, a slow, unsettling smile. "You should be careful," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You never know who might be watching." I backed away, my heart racing. I didn't look back as I hurried to my building. Once inside, I locked the door and called the police. They came and took my statement, but there wasn't much they could do. They said they would patrol the area more often, but without a direct threat, there was little they could do. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and fear. I avoided going out as much as possible. When I did, I made sure I wasn't alone. I told my neighbors and the building manager about the man, and they promised to keep an eye out. One night, as I was about to go to bed, I heard a noise outside my door. My blood ran cold. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. There he was, standing right outside, trying to pick the lock. I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering frantically to the operator. The minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. I could hear him messing with the lock, getting closer to breaking in. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't get in before help arrived. Finally, I heard sirens and the sound of footsteps running up the stairs. The man turned and fled, but the police were right behind him. They caught him before he could get away. The police found a knife in his pocket and a piece of paper with my address on it. They arrested him, and I pressed charges. He had a record of stalking and assault, and it turned out he had been following me for weeks, planning to break in and who knows what else. It took a while for me to feel safe again. I installed extra locks on my door and set up a security system. I still jump at every little noise, but I'm getting better. I'm just glad he's behind bars and can't hurt me. My car broke down in the middle of nowhere. The road was empty, and my phone had no signal. I tried to restart the engine, but it just wouldn't turn over. I got out and looked under the hood, but I didn't know what I was looking at. It was just a mess of metal and wires to me. I was starting to panic when I saw headlights approaching. I waved my arms, hoping they would stop. The car slowed down and pulled over. A man rolled down his window and asked if I needed help. I told him my car wouldn't start, and I needed a tow truck. He looked at my car and said he could give me a ride to the nearest town. I hesitated, but it was getting late, and I didn't want to be stranded all night. I thanked him and got in. He seemed friendly enough, middle-aged, with a kind smile. We drove for a few minutes in silence. Then he started asking me questions. Where was I from? What was I doing out here? I answered politely, but something about his tone made me uneasy. He was too interested, too eager to know everything about me. I noticed we were heading in the opposite direction of the nearest town. I told him he was going the wrong way. He glanced at me and smiled, but didn't turn around. He said he knew a shortcut. My stomach twisted. Something was off. I asked him again to turn around, but he ignored me. I reached for my phone, hoping to find a signal, but there was none. He noticed and chuckled, saying it was pointless out here. My heart was pounding. I had to get out of this car. I told him to stop and let me out. He just kept driving, his smile gone now, replaced with a cold, hard look. I grabbed the door handle, but it wouldn't open. Child locks. My panic rose. I was trapped. I started yelling at him, demanding he let me out. He laughed, a low, chilling sound. He said I wasn't going anywhere. I looked around the car, desperate for something to defend myself with. There was nothing. Just an old blanket on the back seat. We drove deeper into the woods, away from the main road. The trees closed in around us, blocking out the moonlight. It was dark, and I couldn't see a way out. He pulled the car over and turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. He turned to me, his eyes cold and empty. He said I was going to do exactly what he said, or things would get ugly. I was shaking, my mind racing for a way out. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a knife. My blood ran cold. He ordered me to get out of the car. I hesitated, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't bluffing. I opened the door and stepped out, my legs trembling. He got out too, holding the knife casually, like it was just an extension of his hand. He told me to start walking. I asked where, but he just pointed deeper into the woods. I started walking, my mind frantically searching for a way to escape. The underbrush was thick, and the trees loomed overhead, blocking out the stars. I heard him walking behind me, his footsteps crunching on the leaves. I needed to do something, anything. I stumbled over a root and fell, and in that moment, I made a decision. I grabbed a handful of dirt and leaves and threw it in his face. He yelled, stumbling back, and I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I ran as fast as I could. Branches scratched my face, and my lungs burned, but I didn't stop. I could hear him behind me, cursing and crashing through the underbrush. I saw a light ahead, a small cabin in the woods. I sprinted towards it, praying someone was home. I pounded on the door, screaming for help. The door opened, and an old man stood there, a shotgun in his hands. He took one look at me and then passed me to the man chasing me. The old man raised his shotgun and fired a warning shot into the air. The man chasing me stopped, his face twisted in rage. He turned and fled back into the woods. The old man pulled me inside and locked the door. I collapsed on the floor, shaking and crying. He called the police, and they came and took my statement. They searched the woods but didn't find the man. I stayed late at work to finish a project. It was a quiet night, and the office was empty. The only light came from my desk lamp. I had a lot to do and wanted to get it done before the weekend. Around 9 o'clock, I heard a noise. At first, I thought it was just the building settling or the air conditioning kicking on. But then I heard it again, louder this time. It sounded like footsteps. I stopped typing and listened. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, like someone was trying not to be heard. My heart started to race. I knew I was supposed to be the only one in the building. I got up from my desk and walked to the door of my office. I peeked out into the hallway but didn't see anyone. The hallway was dim, lit only by emergency lights. I told myself it was probably nothing, just my imagination. I went back to my desk and tried to focus on my work. But then I heard the footsteps again, closer this time. I stood up and went to the door again. This time, I saw a shadow moving down the hallway. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just stay there and wait for whoever it was to find me. I quietly shut my office door and locked it. I turned off my desk lamp and stood in the darkness, listening. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear them just outside my office now. I held my breath, hoping whoever it was would just pass by. But then I heard a hand on the doorknob, trying to turn it. The door rattled as the person tried to open it. I backed away, my mind racing. I had to get out of there. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hit the buttons. The door stopped rattling, and everything went quiet. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow. Then I heard a voice. It was low and menacing, calling my name. It was a voice I recognized. It was John, a former employee who had been fired for harassment. My blood ran cold. He had been stalking me for months before he was fired, leaving creepy notes on my desk and following me home. I thought I was rid of him, but now he was back. I told the 911 operator what was happening, trying to keep my voice low. She told me to stay on the line and stay hidden. But I knew I couldn't stay in my office. He would find a way in eventually. I looked around for something to defend myself with, but there was nothing. Just my laptop and some office supplies. I knew I had to make a run for it. I told the operator I was going to try to get out of the building. I unlocked my office door as quietly as I could and opened it just a crack. I didn't see him, but I could hear him somewhere down the hallway. I took a deep breath and slipped out of my office, closing the door behind me. I crept down the hallway, trying to be as quiet as possible. My heart was pounding so loudly I was afraid he would hear it. I reached the stairwell and opened the door, praying it wouldn't make too much noise. I started down the stairs, but halfway down, I heard the stairwell door open above me. I looked up and saw John standing there, staring down at me with a twisted smile. He started down the stairs after me. I ran as fast as I could, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I burst out into the lobby and ran for the front door, but it was locked. I fumbled with the lock, my hand shaking, but I couldn't get it open. I turned and saw John coming down the stairs, his eyes locked on me. I ran into the break room and slammed the door behind me. I looked around for something to block the door with and saw a chair. I wedged it under the doorknob. I could hear him outside the door, trying to get in. I looked around the room, desperate for another way out. There was a small window high up on the wall. I grabbed a chair and climbed up, pushing the window open. It was a tight fit, but I managed to squeeze through. I fell to the ground outside, scraping my hands and knees. I got up and ran, not looking back. I didn't stop until I reached a nearby convenience store. I burst inside, out of breath and shaking. The clerk looked at me like I was crazy, but I didn't care. I asked to use the phone and called the police again, telling them where I was. They arrived a few minutes later and took my statement. They went back to the office building and found John trying to break down the door to the break room. They arrested him on the spot. I was shaken up, but I was safe. I didn't go back to work for a few days. I needed time to recover. I rented an isolated Airbnb for a weekend getaway. I wanted some peace and quiet. The place was perfect, a small cabin surrounded by woods. The host, Jim, seemed friendly at first. He greeted me with a big smile and showed me around. The first night was peaceful. I sat by the fireplace, reading a book and enjoying the solitude. The cabin was cozy, and the woods were silent except for the occasional rustling of leaves. I went to bed early, feeling relaxed. The next morning, Jim showed up unannounced. He said he was checking to make sure everything was all right. It seemed a bit strange, but I didn't think much of it. He left after a few minutes, and I went about my day. Later that afternoon, I went for a hike. The trails around the cabin were beautiful. When I returned, I found Jim sitting on the porch. He said he was waiting to ask if I needed anything. I assured him I was fine and thanked him. He left, but I started feeling uneasy. That evening, I cooked dinner and tried to relax. Around 8 p.m., there was a knock at the door. It was Jim again. He said he wanted to make sure I was comfortable. I felt a bit creeped out but didn't want to be rude. I thanked him and closed the door. The next morning, I woke up to find Jim outside, walking around the cabin. I watched him through the window for a while. He seemed to be inspecting the place. I decided to confront him. When I stepped outside, he smiled and said he was just making sure everything was in order. I told him I appreciated his concern but needed some privacy. That afternoon, I tried to call a friend, but there was no cell service. I hadn't noticed before, but the cabin was in a dead zone. I felt isolated and uneasy. I decided to leave the next day, cutting my trip short. That night, I heard footsteps outside the cabin. I looked out the window and saw Jim walking around again. He was holding something that looked like a tool. I locked the doors and windows, my heart pounding. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, Jim showed up again. He knocked on the door, and when I didn't answer, he started shouting. He demanded to be let in, saying he needed to check something inside. I told him to go away, but he kept shouting. I realized I was trapped. There was no way to call for help, and Jim was getting more aggressive. I decided to make a run for it. I packed a bag quickly and snuck out the back door while he was still pounding on the front. I ran through the woods, trying to stay quiet. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get away from the cabin. After a while, I found a road. I followed it until I reached a small town. I went to the nearest store and asked to use the phone. I called the police and told them what happened. They took my statement and said they would check on the cabin. I felt relieved but still shaken. The police found Jim at the cabin. They said he was acting erratic and had a history of mental illness. They took him into custody and assured me he wouldn't bother me again. I was safe, but the experience left me rattled. I couldn't believe how quickly things had escalated. I was staying at this old historic hotel for a work trip. It was one of those places with creaky floors and dim lighting. The kind of place that feels like it has a past. My room was on the top floor, and the windows overlooked a courtyard. It was charming in an old-world kind of way. On my second night there, I noticed something odd. One of the panels in the wall near the bed looked slightly different. It had a tiny latch at the bottom, almost invisible. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to see what it was. I pulled on the latch, and the panel swung open, revealing a dark passageway. It was narrow and seemed to stretch on for a while. I grabbed my phone for light and stepped inside. The air was musty, and I could feel the walls closing in on me as I walked. The passage twisted and turned, leading to who knows where. My heart was pounding, but I kept going, wanting to see where it led. After a few minutes, I reached a small room with an old chair and some dusty bookshelves. It looked like no one had been there for years. I turned around to head back, but the passage behind me was pitch black. I shined my phone's light, and to my horror, the panel had shut behind me. I rushed back, trying to find the latch from the inside. My fingers fumbled in the dark, and I couldn't find anything to open the panel. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. I shouted for help, but the thick walls muffled my voice. No one could hear me. Minutes felt like hours as I tried to stay calm and figure out what to do. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. Someone was moving through the passage. Relief washed over me until I realized they were coming closer. I hid in the small room, my heart racing. A figure appeared in the passage, holding a flashlight. It was a man, and he looked around before speaking. "I know you're here," he said in a low, chilling voice. "You shouldn't have come in." I stayed as still as possible, hoping he wouldn't find me. He moved closer, his flashlight scanning the room. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. The light passed over me, and for a moment I thought he hadn't seen me. But then he stopped and shined the light right at me. "There you are," he said, smiling. "This is my place. You shouldn't have come here." I tried to explain, to apologize, but he just shook his head. "Too late for that," he said. "You need to stay here now." He moved to block the exit, and I knew I had to do something. I grabbed one of the old books from the shelf and threw it at him. It hit his arm, and he stumbled back, giving me a split second to run past him. I sprinted down the passage, my heart pounding. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get away from him. The passage seemed endless, twisting and turning. I could hear his footsteps behind me, getting closer. Finally, I saw a faint light up ahead. I ran towards it, praying it was an exit. The light grew brighter, and I burst out into another room, this one filled with old furniture covered in sheets. I slammed the door behind me and looked around for something to block it. I found an old dresser and pushed it in front of the door. The man pounded on the other side, shouting, but the door held. I sank to the floor, my heart racing. I had to find another way out. I searched the room and found another door. It led to a staircase, winding up to the upper floors of the hotel. I ran up the stairs, my legs burning with each step. The staircase seemed to go on forever, but I finally reached a small landing with another door. I pushed it open and found myself in a hallway on the top floor of the hotel. I recognized it from when I first arrived. I ran to my room and locked the door behind me, my heart still racing. I grabbed my things and called the front desk, telling them I needed to leave immediately. The hotel staff was confused but helped me check out quickly. I didn't explain what happened, just that I had an emergency. As I left, I saw the man standing in the courtyard, watching me. His eyes were cold and calculating. I got into my car and drove away, not looking back. I reported the incident to the police, but they didn't find anything. The hotel claimed there were no hidden passages, no secret rooms. It was like it never happened. But I know what I saw. I decided to rent a beach house for a week to get some peace and quiet. The house was beautiful, right on the water with big windows that looked out over the ocean. The first few days were perfect. I spent my time reading, walking on the beach, and just relaxing. On the fourth night, I was reading in the living room when I heard a noise coming from the kitchen. It was strange because I was sure I had locked the doors and windows. I got up to check, thinking maybe the wind had knocked something over. When I walked into the kitchen, there was a man standing there. He was about my age, maybe a bit older, with a scruffy beard and worn clothes. He looked surprised to see me. I was shocked and scared. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I could ask you the same thing," he replied. "I rented this place for the week." My heart started to race. "That's not possible," I said. "I rented this house. There must be some mistake." He shook his head. "No mistake. I have the paperwork right here." He reached into his bag and pulled out some papers. I glanced at them, and they looked legit, but something felt off. I took a deep breath. "Look, there's obviously been some mix-up. Let's call the rental agency and sort this out." He didn't seem interested in that. "Why don't we just figure it out ourselves?" he suggested, a strange look in his eyes. I backed up a step. "No, I think we should call. This doesn't make sense." He took a step towards me. "I think you should leave," he said, his voice hardening. "This is my place." Panic set in. I turned and ran for my phone, dialing the rental agency's number. As it rang, he followed me into the living room. "Put the phone down," he ordered, his tone menacing. I ignored him, my hand shaking as I waited for someone to pick up. The line clicked, and a woman's voice answered. "Hello, Coastal Rentals. How can I help you?" I spoke quickly. "There's a man here who says he rented this house, but I rented it. Can you check the bookings?" The man lunged at me, grabbing the phone from my hand and throwing it across the room. It smashed against the wall, pieces scattering on the floor. "Get out," he shouted, his face twisted with anger. "This is my place." I tried to stay calm. Okay. I'll leave. Just let me grab my things." He watched me, his eyes never leaving mine. I slowly backed towards the bedroom, keeping my movements slow and non-threatening. Once inside, I quickly grabbed my bag and keys. When I came back out, he was blocking the front door. "You're not going anywhere," he said. My heart pounded in my chest. "I don't want any trouble," I said. "Just let me leave, and I'll call the police to sort this out." He smirked. "The police won't believe you. They'll think you're the intruder." I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. I glanced around, looking for another way out. There was a sliding glass door that led to the deck. It was my only chance. I made a break for it, running to the door and yanking it open. I sprinted across the deck and down the stairs, heading towards the beach. Behind me, I heard him shouting and giving chase. The sand was hard to run on, but I kept going, my legs burning with the effort. I looked back and saw him gaining on me. I had to think fast. I spotted a group of people further down the beach, sitting around a fire. I ran towards them, hoping they could help me. When I got close, I started yelling for help. The people looked up, confused and alarmed. The man chasing me slowed down, realizing he couldn't continue without drawing attention to himself. He stopped, glaring at me from a distance. I reached the group, breathless and terrified. "Please, help me," I gasped. "That man is trying to hurt me." They stood up, putting themselves between me and the man. One of them, a tall guy with a serious expression, stepped forward. "What's going on?" he asked. I quickly explained the situation, keeping an eye on the man. He stood there for a moment, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. The group stayed with me until I could catch my breath. One of them lent me their phone, and I called the police. They arrived quickly and took my statement, but by then the man was long gone. The officers checked the house and found signs that someone had been living there. They assured me they would investigate, but I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed up my things and left that night, heading back to the city. It took a while for me to feel safe again. I kept thinking about how easily things could have gone differently. I was driving late at night, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. The gas gauge was nearing empty, so I pulled into this old, rundown gas station. It was the only one I'd seen for miles, and the lights flickering above the pumps didn't exactly scream safe, but I didn't have much choice. The rain was coming down hard, making everything look eerie in the dim light. I got out and started pumping gas, glancing around. There was a single car parked near the entrance, an old sedan that had seen better days. I couldn't see anyone inside. The gas station attendant inside looked odd. He was this older guy with greasy hair and a stained uniform. He kept staring at me through the window with a creepy, blank expression. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, telling myself it was just the lateness and the storm getting to me. Then, I noticed another guy. He was standing by the shelves inside the station, but his eyes were locked on me. He didn't even pretend to browse. Just stood there, staring. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. I finished pumping the gas and went inside to pay. The moment I stepped in, the door's bell jingled loudly, almost making me jump. The guy by the shelves didn't move. He kept staring, his eyes tracking me as I walked to the counter. The attendant didn't say a word, just kept looking at me with that vacant expression. I handed over my credit card, and the attendant took it without breaking eye contact. The silence was thick, the kind that makes your skin crawl. I glanced at the guy by the shelves again. He had moved a little closer, still watching me. The attendant swiped my card but seemed to take forever handing it back. I was starting to panic inside, but I tried to keep calm. I didn't want to show any fear. I signed the receipt quickly and grabbed my card back, muttering a thanks. As I turned to leave, the guy by the shelves finally moved. He stepped into my path, blocking the exit. "You heading far?" he asked, his voice low and rough. I lied, said I wasn't going far, just a few miles up the road. He didn't look convinced. The attendant was still staring, and I could feel the weight of their eyes on me. I needed to get out of there, but I didn't want to run and make things worse. I forced a smile and stepped around the guy, hoping he wouldn't follow. Outside, the rain had picked up, and I hurried to my car, fumbling with my keys. I glanced back and saw the guy still standing in the doorway, watching me. The attendant had come to the window, his face pressed against the glass. I got in my car and locked the doors, my heart pounding. I started the engine, trying to stay calm. The guy from the store walked towards my car slowly. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the lot, my tires slipping on the wet pavement. In the rearview mirror, I saw the guy stop at the edge of the lot, watching me drive away. I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see him following me, but he didn't. I drove for a few miles, my hands gripping the wheel tight. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. I felt like I had dodged something bad, but I couldn't quite figure out what. I decided to keep driving until I found a safer place, somewhere with more people around. After about 20 minutes, I reached a small diner that was still open. I pulled in and parked, taking a few deep breaths before going inside. The place was bright and noisy, a stark contrast to the gas station. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I ordered a coffee and sat in a corner booth, trying to shake off the lingering fear. The rain was still pouring outside, but inside, it felt safer. I couldn't stop thinking about the gas station, the creepy attendant, and the guy who had watched my every move. I called a friend and told them what happened, needing to hear a familiar voice. They offered to come get me, but I said I'd be fine. I just needed to gather my thoughts and figure out my next move. I stayed at the diner for a while, watching the rain and thinking about how close I'd come to something terrible. Eventually, I felt calm enough to get back on the road. I paid my bill and headed to my car, feeling more confident now. Driving away from the diner, I kept an eye on the road and my surroundings, making sure I wasn't being followed. The further I got from that gas station, the safer I felt. I promised myself I'd never stop at a place like that again, no matter how low on gas I was. I finally made it to my destination, exhausted but safe. I locked the door to my room and double-checked the windows, still feeling on edge. It took a while to fall asleep, my mind replaying the night's events over and over. In the morning, the storm had passed, and everything seemed normal again. But I knew I wouldn't forget that night for a long time. It was a reminder that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places, and sometimes, it's the people you least expect who pose the biggest threats. I was grateful to have trusted my instincts and gotten out of there when I did. I was driving home late one night, feeling the exhaustion from a long day at work. The road was empty, and the only light came from my headlights. I saw a man standing by the side of the road with his thumb out. I hesitated for a moment but decided to stop and help. It was cold, and he looked harmless enough. He climbed into the passenger seat, thanking me profusely. He introduced himself as Tom and said his car had broken down a few miles back. He seemed friendly, talking about where he was headed and asking about my day. I felt a bit more relaxed as we drove. After a few miles, the conversation took a strange turn. Tom started asking personal questions, like if I lived alone and if I had a boyfriend. I tried to brush it off, giving vague answers. The atmosphere in the car grew tense. He then leaned closer, his tone changing. "You know, it's dangerous to pick up strangers," he said, his eyes not leaving my face. My heart began to race. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to think of what to do next. Tom's questions became more intrusive. He asked if I had any family nearby and made comments about how easy it would be for someone to disappear out here. My palms were sweating, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I tried to keep calm, responding as politely as I could while thinking of a way to get him out of my car. He noticed my unease and started laughing, a low, unsettling sound. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm just making conversation." But his eyes told a different story. They were cold, and I could feel the danger radiating from him. I needed to get him out of my car, but we were in the middle of nowhere. I decided to lie, telling him I needed to stop for gas at the next station. Tom seemed to buy it, sitting back in his seat. We drove in silence for a few more miles until I saw the lights of a gas station up ahead. I pulled in, my hands trembling. I told him I needed to use the restroom and that he should wait in the car. He watched me closely as I got out. I walked into the station, my mind racing. The attendant looked up, and I whispered that I needed help, that the man in my car was dangerous. The attendant nodded and called the police. I stayed inside, watching Tom from the window. He started to get impatient, looking around and fidgeting in his seat. A few minutes later, the police arrived, surrounding my car. They pulled Tom out and handcuffed him. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The officers took my statement, and one of them told me I did the right thing by getting help. They found a knife in Tom's pocket and said he had a record of similar offenses. I shuddered, thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't stopped. I thanked the police and the gas station attendant, then got back into my car. My hands were still shaking, but I felt safer knowing Tom was in custody. I drove home, the events of the night replaying in my mind. When I finally got home, I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking everything. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. I knew I had to be more careful from now on. The next few days were tough. I kept thinking about Tom and the things he said. I couldn't sleep, and every noise made me jump. But slowly, I started to feel better, knowing I had escaped a dangerous situation. I learned a valuable lesson that night. Sometimes, being kind can put you in harm's way, and you have to be ready to protect yourself. I decided I would never pick up another hitchhiker, no matter how harmless they seemed. Life returned to normal eventually, but I never forgot Tom's face or the fear I felt. It was a reminder that danger can be closer than you think, and you have to trust your instincts. I started carrying pepper spray and took a self-defense class. I wanted to be prepared if anything like that ever happened again. It gave me a sense of control and helped me feel safer. Now, every time I drive that lonely stretch of road, I think about that night. I first noticed him late one night while I was studying in my dorm room. The lights were on in the building opposite mine, and I saw someone standing by the window, staring straight at me. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was looking out into the distance. I shrugged it off and went back to my books. A few days later, I saw him again. Same window, same unblinking stare. It started to make me uneasy. I told my roommate about it, but he just laughed and said I was being paranoid. Maybe he was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One evening, I got a message on my phone from an unknown number. It read, "I see you." My heart skipped a beat. I glanced out the window, and sure enough, there he was, watching me. I closed my curtains, trying to ignore the creeping fear. I told myself it was just a prank. The messages kept coming. They became more personal, more threatening. "You can't hide from me," one read. Another said, "I know where you live." I was terrified. I couldn't focus on my studies, and I started avoiding going out at night. One night, I heard footsteps behind me as I walked back to my dorm from the library. I quickened my pace, but the footsteps did too. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a shadowy figure following me. I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest. I made it back to my dorm and locked the door behind me, gasping for breath. I couldn't sleep that night. Every little noise made me jump. I decided I needed to find out who this person was and put an end to this. The next day, I went to the campus security office and told them everything. They said they would look into it, but I could tell they didn't take me seriously. Determined, I started my own investigation. I began watching the window where I'd first seen him. I noticed that the lights were always on at the same time every night. I decided to go to that building and find out which room it was. I waited until dark, then headed over. My heart was racing as I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. I found the room and knocked on the door. There was no answer. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty, but there were signs someone had been living there. Clothes were scattered on the floor, and there were empty food containers on the desk. I looked around and found a notebook on the bed. It was filled with detailed notes about me, what time I left my dorm, where I went, who I talked to. My blood ran cold. Suddenly, I heard the door creak open behind me. I turned around and saw him standing there, a sinister smile on his face. "I knew you'd come," he said. My mind raced, trying to figure out how to get out of there. He stepped closer, blocking the door. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice shaking. He just laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Because I can," he said. "Because no one can stop me." I grabbed the notebook and threw it at him, hoping to distract him long enough to escape. He dodged it, but it gave me a moment to slip past him and run into the hallway. I sprinted down the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I burst out of the building and ran straight to the campus security office. This time, they could see the fear in my eyes. They took me seriously and went to the building to search for him, but he was gone. The security officers assured me they would keep an eye on my dorm and the surrounding area. They installed cameras and increased patrols, but I still felt uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me, waiting for his next move. For the next few weeks, I tried to go about my life as normally as possible, but I was always looking over my shoulder. The messages stopped, but the fear remained. I couldn't concentrate on my studies, and I avoided going out alone. One evening, I was walking back from a late class when I saw a figure standing under a street lamp ahead of me. My heart sank as I recognized him. He started walking toward me, and I knew I had to act fast. I ducked into a nearby building and ran down the hall, looking for a place to hide. I found an unlocked classroom and slipped inside, locking the door behind me. I could hear his footsteps echoing in the hallway. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. Minutes felt like hours as I waited in the dark. Eventually, the footsteps faded, and I let out a sigh of relief. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I had to do something to end this nightmare. The next day, I went to the police and filed a report. I gave them all the messages and told them everything that had happened. They assured me they would investigate and keep an eye on the campus. Days turned into weeks, and I started to feel a bit more secure. I didn't see him again, and the messages stopped for good. The police eventually found him and arrested him. It turned out he was a former student with a history of stalking. Knowing he was behind bars gave me some peace of mind. Life slowly returned to normal, but the experience changed me. I was more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. I installed extra locks on my door and made sure to always travel with friends at night. I stopped at the rest stop because I was exhausted. It was late, and I had been driving for hours. The parking lot was almost empty, just a couple of cars scattered around. I pulled my truck into a spot near the restrooms and decided to stretch my legs. As I got out, I noticed a group of men standing near an old van a few spots away. They seemed to be talking, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. I went inside, used the restroom, and bought a coffee from the vending machine. When I came back out, the men were still there, and they were looking at my truck. I felt uneasy. Something about the way they were watching made me uncomfortable. I tried to ignore them and walked back to my truck. As I got closer, one of the men stepped forward and smiled at me. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Nice truck," he said. His eyes were cold, and there was something predatory about the way he looked at me. "Thanks," I replied, trying to sound casual. I unlocked the door and started to climb in, but he grabbed the door handle, stopping me. "Where you headed?" he asked, leaning in closer. I could smell alcohol on his breath. "Just passing through," I said, trying to pull the door shut. But he wouldn't let go. "Why don't you stay a while?" he suggested, his grip tightening. The other men started to move closer. My heart was pounding. I knew I had to get out of there. I yanked the door hard, catching him off guard, and managed to slam it shut. I locked it quickly and started the engine. The men began banging on the windows, shouting at me to get out. I put the truck in reverse and backed out of the parking spot as fast as I could. One of them tried to block my way, but I swerved around him. I hit the gas and sped out of the rest stop, my hand shaking on the wheel. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw their van pulling out behind me. They were following me. I tried to stay calm and think of what to do. There was no way I could outrun them in my truck. I needed a plan. I remembered there was a town a few miles down the road. If I could just make it there, I might find help. I kept driving, checking the mirror every few seconds. The van was getting closer. Up ahead, I saw the lights of the town. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The van was right behind me, and they were gaining on me. I took a sharp turn onto a side street, hoping to lose them in the maze of small roads. I zigzagged through the streets, trying to shake them off. At one point, I thought I had lost them, but then I saw the van's headlights in the mirror again. They were relentless. I spotted a police station up ahead and turned into the parking lot. I honked the horn repeatedly, hoping to get someone's attention. The van pulled in behind me, and the men started to get out. Just then, the door of the police station opened, and an officer stepped out. The men froze, then jumped back into the van and sped off. The officer walked over to my truck, and I rolled down the window, still shaking. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked. I told him everything that had happened, and he took my statement. He assured me they would look for the van and the men. He also suggested I stay in town for the night, just to be safe. I found a small motel nearby and checked in. My nerves were still on edge, but I felt a bit safer knowing the police were aware of what happened. I locked the door and pushed a chair against it, just in case. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me jump. I kept thinking about those men and what might have happened if I hadn't gotten away. The fear lingered, making it hard to breathe. The next morning, I went back to the police station to see if they had found anything. The officer told me they were still looking for the van, but so far, there were no leads. He advised me to be cautious and report any suspicious activity. I thanked him and decided to continue my journey. I was still shaken, but I knew I couldn't let fear control me. As I drove out of town as quick as I could, I decided to go on a solo hike in the mountains to clear my mind. The trail was supposed to be easy, and I needed the peace and quiet. I started early in the morning, enjoying the crisp air and the sound of birds. After about an hour, I noticed another hiker coming up behind me. He seemed friendly enough, waving as he caught up to me. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, smiling. He had a backpack and looked like he knew what he was doing. I didn't think much of it and agreed. We started chatting as we walked, talking about the trail and the weather. His name was Tom. At first, everything was normal. Tom seemed nice, but then he started asking questions that made me uncomfortable. He wanted to know why I was hiking alone, where I lived, and if anyone knew where I was. I tried to brush off his questions with vague answers, but he kept pressing. We walked for a while longer, and his behavior became more erratic. He would stop suddenly, looking around as if he heard something, then start walking again without saying anything. It was unsettling. I began to feel uneasy and thought about how I could lose him without getting lost myself. I decided to slow down, pretending to tie my shoelaces, hoping he would keep going ahead. But he stopped too, waiting for me. My heart started to race. I needed to get away from him, but I didn't want to draw attention to my fear. After a while, I saw a side trail that wasn't marked on my map. I told Tom I needed to take a break and suggested he go on without me. He insisted on waiting, but I lied and said I felt sick and might turn back. He seemed annoyed but eventually walked ahead. As soon as he was out of sight, I took the side trail, hoping it would loop back to the main one. I walked quickly, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. The trail was narrow and overgrown, but I kept going. After about 10 minutes, I heard footsteps behind me. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't dare look back, but I knew it was him. I picked up my pace, almost running now. The trail twisted and turned, and I hoped I was losing him. I came to a small clearing and hid behind a large tree, trying to catch my breath. I listened intently, but the forest was silent. I waited for what felt like an eternity, then cautiously stepped back onto the trail. Suddenly, Tom appeared in front of me, blocking my path. His face was twisted in anger. "Why did you run?" he demanded. I stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but he cut me off. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, stepping closer. I panicked and ran in the opposite direction, not caring where the trail led. I could hear him chasing me, his footsteps getting closer. I spotted a fallen tree and scrambled over it, hoping it would slow him down. I stumbled upon another hiker, a woman with a large dog. I rushed her, gasping for breath, and told her what was happening. She immediately called her dog to her side and shouted for Tom to back off. Tom stopped, glaring at us, then slowly backed away and disappeared into the trees. The woman introduced herself as Lisa and offered to walk with me back to the main trail. Her dog stayed close, and I felt a bit safer. We made our way back, and I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting Tom to reappear. When we finally reached the main trail, Lisa suggested we head to the ranger station together. I agreed, still shaken. We reported what happened, and the rangers promised to look for Tom. They told me I did the right thing by finding someone else and getting help. I was home alone with my baby, Lily, on a rainy night. My husband had left for a business trip earlier that day, and it was just the two of us. I had put Lily to sleep in her crib upstairs and settled on the couch with a book. The rain pounded against the windows, creating a soothing background noise. I must have dozed off because I woke up to a strange sound. It wasn't the rain. It was a soft thumping noise, like footsteps. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest, and strained to listen. The house was silent except for the rain. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just the house settling, but the sound came again. I glanced at the clock. It was just after midnight. I felt a chill run down my spine. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, feeling a bit silly but too scared to ignore it. I crept toward the stairs, the wooden floorboards creaking under my feet. I paused, listening. The footsteps were clearer now, coming from upstairs. My mind raced. What if someone had broken in? I thought of Lily sleeping in her crib and felt a surge of panic. I needed to protect her. I needed to know what was happening. I slowly ascended the stairs, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it would wake the baby. At the top of the stairs, I stopped again, listening. The sound was coming from Lily's room. My breath caught in my throat. I edged closer to her door, which was slightly ajar. I could see the soft glow of her nightlight spilling into the hallway. I pushed the door open with trembling hands. Lily was still asleep, thank God. But there was a man standing over her crib. My blood turned to ice. He was tall, with dark clothes and a hood pulled over his head. He hadn't noticed me yet. I stepped back, my mind racing. I needed to get Lily and get out of there, but how? I backed into the hallway, trying to think. I remembered the baby monitor in our bedroom. I could use it to call for help. But first, I had to get Lily. I took a deep breath and stepped back into her room. The man turned and saw me. His eyes were cold and menacing. "Don't scream," he said in a low voice. I froze. He moved toward me, and I bolted. I ran into our bedroom and locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I grabbed the baby monitor and turned it on, speaking into it. "Help. Someone's in the house." I whispered urgently, hoping my neighbors would hear it on their end. I could hear the man pounding on the door. I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I needed a weapon. I grabbed a heavy lamp from the nightstand and stood by the door, ready to swing. The door burst open, and the man lunged at me. I swung the lamp with all my strength, hitting him in the head. He stumbled but didn't go down. I swung again, this time hitting him in the arm. He grabbed me, and we struggled. I screamed, hoping someone would hear. I managed to break free and ran back to Lily's room. She was awake now, crying. I scooped her up and ran down the stairs, the man hot on my heels. I could hear sirens in the distance. Someone had heard my call for help. I burst out the front door and into the pouring rain, clutching Lily to my chest. I ran to my neighbor's house, banging on the door. They let me in, and I collapsed on the floor, sobbing. The police arrived minutes later and found the man still in my house. They arrested him and took him away. I held Lily close, feeling relief wash over me. It turned out the man had been watching our house for days, waiting for the right moment. He had broken in through a window while I was asleep. The police said he was wanted for several other break-ins in the area. I shuddered at the thought of what could have happened if I hadn't woken up when I did. That night changed everything for me. I never felt safe in my own home again. I went out early that morning, hoping to get some quiet time on the lake. Fishing alone had always been my way of unwinding, especially after a stressful week. The weather was perfect, a light mist over the water and not too cold. I set up my gear and cast my line, enjoying the stillness around me. After a while, I noticed another fisherman not too far from me. He was waving and smiling. I waved back politely. He started walking over, his gear slung over his shoulder. "Morning," he called out cheerfully. "Morning," I replied, trying to focus on my line. "Nice spot you got here," he said, settling down nearby. "Mind if I join you?" "Sure," I said, though I would have preferred to be alone. He introduced himself as Mark and started chatting about fishing, the weather, and other small talk. I answered politely but kept my responses short. He seemed nice enough, but I really just wanted some peace and quiet. After a while, Mark's friendliness started to feel a bit intrusive. He kept asking questions about my life, where I lived, what I did for work. I gave vague answers, hoping he'd take the hint. "Hey, how about we try that spot over there?" he suggested, pointing to a more secluded area of the lake. "I'm good here," I said, not wanting to move. "Come on, I heard it's really good over there," he insisted. "No, thanks. I think I'll stay put," I replied firmly. His friendly demeanor changed slightly. "Suit yourself," he muttered, moving a bit closer to me. I started to feel uneasy. There was something off about him. His questions became more personal, more invasive. "You always come out here alone?" he asked, his tone a bit too curious. "Usually," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He stared at me for a moment, then smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's nice, isn't it? Just you and nature." "Yeah," I said, glancing at my phone. I decided it was time to leave. "Well, I think I'm gonna head back," I said, starting to pack up my gear. "Already?" he asked, standing up. "The best time for fishing is just coming up." "I've got some things to do," I said, trying to sound casual. He stepped closer, blocking my path. "Stay a bit longer. It's not often you get such good company out here." I felt a surge of panic. "Really, I need to go," I insisted, my heart pounding. He grabbed my arm. I said stay, he said, his grip tightening. I yanked my arm away. "Let go of me," I snapped, backing away. His friendly mask dropped completely. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice low and menacing. I looked around, trying to find a way out. The path back to my car was a good distance away, and I didn't know if I could outrun him. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to keep him talking while I thought of a plan. He shrugged. "It's more fun with company," he said, taking a step closer. I backed up further, my mind racing. I remembered the knife in my tackle box. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I said, edging toward my gear. "Too late for that," he said, lunging at me. I grabbed the knife and swung it out in front of me. He stopped short, eyes wide. "Stay back," I warned, holding the knife between us. He sneered. "You think that scares me?" "Stay back," I repeated, my voice shaking. He lunged again, and I slashed at him, catching his arm. He yelled in pain, but it didn't stop him. He tackled me, knocking the knife from my hand. We struggled on the ground, and I managed to kick him off me. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward my car, adrenaline giving me a burst of speed. I could hear him behind me, shouting and cursing. I didn't look back, just focused on getting to my car. I reached it and fumbled for my keys, my hand shaking. I got the door open and jumped in, locking it behind me. He pounded on the window, but I started the engine and sped off, my heart racing. I drove straight to the nearest town and went to the police station. They took my statement and sent officers to the lake, but by the time they got there, Mark was gone. I was waiting for the last train home. It was late, and the platform was almost empty. Just a few people scattered around. I tried to keep to myself, but I noticed a man standing a bit further down, staring at me. I brushed it off at first, thinking he might just be zoning out or looking at something behind me. But his eyes never moved. The train finally arrived, and I hurried to get on. I picked an empty car, hoping for some peace and quiet. As I settled into a seat by the window, I saw him get on the same car. Out of all the empty seats, he chose the one directly across from me. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to focus on my phone, scrolling mindlessly through social media, but I could feel his eyes on me. Every time I glanced up, he was staring, unblinking. My heart started to race, and I thought about moving to another car, but I didn't want to seem paranoid or rude. Maybe it was just a coincidence, I told myself. But then he started talking. "Late night for you too?" His voice was low and raspy. I nodded, not really wanting to engage. He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving mine. "You shouldn't be out this late. It's not safe for someone like you." I didn't respond. I just stared at my phone, praying he'd get the hint and leave me alone. But he didn't. He kept talking, asking where I was going, if I lived alone, what I did for work. His questions were invasive and made me uncomfortable. I answered as briefly as possible, hoping he'd get bored and stop. The train moved through each station, and no one else got on. It was just me and him. I considered getting off at the next stop and waiting for another train, but I didn't want to be stuck on an empty platform with him. I decided to stay put and get off at my usual stop. He seemed to sense my discomfort and leaned back, still staring. I tried to think of ways to distract myself, but nothing worked. My thoughts were consumed by fear. The train announced my stop, and I stood up, hoping he'd stay behind. But he stood up too, following me to the door. I stepped off the train, my heart pounding. The platform was deserted, and I could hear his footsteps behind me. I walked quickly, trying to get to the exit, but he matched my pace. "Wait up," he called, his voice echoing in the empty station. I broke into a run, not caring if I seemed paranoid anymore. I could hear him running after me, his footsteps getting closer. I reached the stairs and bolted up them, my breath coming in short gasps. I glanced back and saw him gaining on me. Panic set in, and I pushed myself harder, my legs burning with effort. I burst out of the station and into the street. It was dark, and the few streetlights cast long shadows. I spotted a convenience store a block away and ran towards it, hoping for safety. I could still hear him behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I reached the store and burst through the doors, startling the cashier. I ran to the back, hiding behind a shelf, trying to catch my breath. I heard the man enter the store, his footsteps slow and deliberate. I peeked through the shelves and saw him looking around, searching for me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering my location to the operator. I stayed hidden, praying the police would arrive soon. The man walked down each aisle, getting closer to my hiding spot. My heart was in my throat, and I could barely breathe. Just as he reached the aisle I was in, the sound of sirens filled the air. He froze, his eyes narrowing. He turned and walked out of the store, disappearing into the night. I stayed hidden until the police arrived, too scared to move. They took my statement and escorted me home, promising to patrol the area. I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on me, even in the safety of my apartment. I double-checked the locks and closed the curtains, but sleep didn't come easy that night. Every noise made me jump, and I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't run. That night changed everything for me. I rented a cabin in the woods to finish my book. The place was quiet and perfect for writing. One night, I was deep into my writing when I heard a knock at the door. It was strange because it was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I got up and looked through the window. A man stood there, looking nervous. He said he was lost and needed help. I hesitated but opened the door slightly. He said his name was Tim and that his car broke down a few miles back. He looked harmless, but something felt off. His story seemed rehearsed. I told him I could call someone for him, but he insisted on coming inside to use the phone. I didn't want to let him in, but it was cold outside. I told him to wait while I got my phone. As I turned away, I caught a glimpse of him looking around nervously. I returned with the phone and handed it to him through the crack in the door. He took it but didn't dial right away. Instead, he kept talking, asking if I was alone and if there were any other cabins nearby. His questions made me uneasy. I told him I was busy and needed to get back to my work. He finally dialed a number, but I didn't hear anyone answer. He handed the phone back and asked if he could come in just for a minute to warm up. I lied and said my heater was broken, hoping he'd leave. He didn't. He started talking about how dangerous the woods could be at night and how lucky I was to have a cabin. The more he talked, the more I felt like he was stalling. I kept the door barely open, ready to shut it if he tried anything. Suddenly, he asked if I had seen anyone else around. I said no, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a cold, unsettling smile. He said he thought he saw someone lurking near the woods. I looked where he pointed, but it was too dark to see anything. I told him I needed to get back to my work and started to close the door. He put his hand on it, stopping me. His grip was strong. He leaned in and said he was really thirsty and just needed a glass of water. My heart was pounding now. I told him I'd bring him some water, but he insisted on coming inside. I knew then that he wasn't lost. He had a different plan. I pushed the door hard, trying to close it, but he was strong. He forced it open and stepped inside. I backed away, grabbing a heavy book from the table to use as a weapon. He looked around the cabin, nodding to himself. "Nice place you got here," he said, his tone mocking. I demanded he leave, but he just laughed. He started walking towards me, and I swung the book at him. He dodged it easily and grabbed my wrist, twisting it painfully until I dropped the book. He pushed me against the wall, his face inches from mine. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, but his grip tightened. "I just need a place to stay for the night." His breath smelled of alcohol, and his eyes were wild. I was terrified. I tried to think of a way out. I told him he could stay if he let me go, hoping to buy some time. He released my wrist and stepped back, but his eyes never left me. I moved slowly towards the kitchen, trying to keep calm. I grabbed a knife from the counter and held it out in front of me. "You need to leave now," I said, my voice shaking. He stared at the knife and then at me. For a moment, I thought he might listen. But then he lunged at me, knocking the knife out of my hand. We struggled, and I managed to kick him hard in the shin. He cursed and let go of me. I ran towards the door, but he was right behind me. I grabbed a chair and swung it at him, hitting him in the side. He stumbled, giving me a chance to open the door. I ran outside, not looking back. The woods were dark, and I didn't know where to go. I could hear him yelling behind me, his footsteps getting closer. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my ears. I saw a light in the distance and headed towards it. It was another cabin. I banged on the door, praying someone would answer. A man opened it, and I rushed inside, locking the door behind me. I explained what happened, and he called the police. They arrived quickly and found the stranger hiding near my cabin. He was arrested, and I was safe, but the experience left me shaken. I couldn't stay in the cabin after that. I packed my things and left. I rented a cabin out in the middle of nowhere, trying to get some peace and quiet to finish my novel. It was supposed to be a perfect escape. The place was cozy but isolated, surrounded by dense forest. I thought it would be ideal. Little did I know, my idea of peace was about to be shattered. One night, as I sat in the living room working on my manuscript, I heard a knock at the door. It was strange because I hadn't seen anyone for days. I hesitated but then went to check. Through the peephole, I saw a man standing there, looking disheveled and cold. He introduced himself as John, saying he was lost and needed help. He claimed his car broke down miles away, and he had been walking for hours. His story didn't add up. I noticed his clothes were clean for someone who had been wandering in the woods. I told him I couldn't help since I was alone and needed to keep the door locked. He seemed to accept that, but something about him made me uneasy. His eyes kept darting around as if he was searching for something beyond the warmth of the cabin. After he left, I went back to work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My writing flow was interrupted by the eerie quiet of the cabin and the shadowy figures of the forest outside. I kept checking the door to make sure it was still locked. Later that night, I heard another knock. This time, it was more insistent. I peeked through the peephole again, and to my surprise, John was back. He said he had found his way but claimed he needed to use the phone. I refused, telling him I'd call someone for him. He insisted and started getting agitated. His demeanor shifted from calm to erratic, and he began making strange comments about how I should let him in. I didn't open the door but watched as he paced outside, mumbling to himself. Feeling more alarmed, I decided to call the local police. I tried to stay calm, explaining the situation and giving them the details of John's description. The operator assured me they would send someone out, but it would take a while given the location of the cabin. As I waited, I noticed something unsettling. From a window, I saw John trying to peek inside. It was clear he was trying to figure out where I was. I had no way of knowing if he had any weapons or if he was alone. The minutes dragged on, and I could hear John's muffled voice outside, growing more frustrated. He started banging on the door, demanding I let him in. I stayed hidden and silent, not sure what his next move would be. Eventually, I heard a vehicle approach. My heart raced with hope that it was the police. I carefully opened the door slightly, and when I saw the officers, I quickly let them inside. They searched the area but found no sign of John. The officers assured me that he had probably left, but they would patrol the area to make sure. They asked if I wanted to leave with them, but I insisted on staying. I felt safer now, knowing the police were nearby. After they left, I double-checked all the locks and set up a few more security measures. The night was long and tense, but I managed to sleep fitfully, constantly waking at every little sound. The next morning, I packed up my things quickly, eager to leave the cabin behind. As I drove away, I glanced back one last time, hoping never to see that place or John again. The isolation and fear had turned what was supposed to be a peaceful retreat into a nightmare. I still think about that night. The way John's story kept changing, the anger in his voice, it all felt like a warning. It made me realize how quickly a quiet escape can become a terrifying ordeal. It was late, and the rain was coming down hard. I could barely see the road through my windshield. My gas gauge was almost on empty, so I pulled into the first gas station I saw. It was nearly deserted, just one other car parked under the awning. The station looked old and run down, but it was my only option. I got out of my car and ran to the door, trying to avoid getting too wet. The inside was dimly lit, and the smell of old coffee hung in the air. The attendant was an older man, maybe in his late 50s, with a friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He greeted me as I came in. "Rough night, huh?" he said, his voice gravelly. "Yeah, just need some gas," I replied, trying to be polite but not really wanting to engage in conversation. "Sure thing. Pumps on. Pay when you're done." I nodded and headed back out to fill up my car. The rain was relentless, soaking me in seconds. I hurried back inside once the tank was full. I handed the man a 20 and waited for my change. As he fiddled with the cash register, I glanced around. The place was cluttered with old magazines, dusty shelves, and a faint hum of fluorescent lights. It gave me an uneasy feeling. Then, I heard the sound of a lock clicking. I looked over and saw the attendant turning the key in the front door. My stomach dropped. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just locking up for the night," he said, but his tone was different now. Less friendly. More menacing. "I need to go," I said, moving toward the door. He stepped in front of me, blocking my way. "I don't think so," he said. "Why don't you stay a while? We can have a little chat." Panic surged through me. I backed away, looking for another way out. The windows were barred, and there was only one other door behind the counter. I had to think fast. "Please, I just want to leave," I pleaded, hoping to reason with him. He shook his head slowly, a creepy smile spreading across his face. "You're not going anywhere." I glanced at the counter, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. There was a metal coffee pot within reach. I grabbed it and swung it at him. It hit his arm, and he stumbled back, cursing. I took my chance and bolted for the door behind the counter. I pushed through and found myself in a small storage room. Boxes were piled high, and there was a faint smell of mildew. I frantically searched for another exit, but there was none. Footsteps approached, and I knew I didn't have much time. I spotted a metal shelf and shoved it against the door, hoping it would buy me some time. The door rattled as he tried to push it open. I could hear him shouting, but I couldn't make out the words. My heart was pounding in my chest. I had to find a way out. I spotted a small window high up on the wall. It was my only chance. I climbed onto a stack of boxes and pushed at the window. It was stuck, but I used all my strength to force it open. The gap was small, but I managed to squeeze through. I dropped to the ground outside, the rain still pouring down. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I ran to my car, fumbling with my keys. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. I finally got the door open and jumped inside, locking the doors behind me. I started the car and peeled out of the gas station, my tires skidding on the wet pavement. In the rearview mirror, I saw the attendant standing in the doorway, watching me with that same eerie smile. I didn't stop driving until I reached a busy highway. My heart was still racing, and I felt like I might be sick. I pulled over at a well-lit rest stop and called the police. I told them everything, but I didn't know if they would find him. I just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. The rest of the drive was a blur. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see that old sedan following me. When I finally got home, I locked every door and window and sat in the dark, trying to calm down. I don't know what that man's plans were, and I don't want to find out. All I know is that I'll never stop at a deserted gas station again. I left work late that night, the rain pouring down hard. The office was almost empty when I stepped out, and the streets were quiet. I hurried to the parking garage, my coat barely keeping me dry. The sound of the rain hitting the pavement was loud, but I noticed something else. Footsteps behind me. I glanced back and saw a figure, just a shadow in the dim light. I quickened my pace, my heart starting to race. I told myself it was nothing, just someone else trying to get out of the storm. But the footsteps matched my speed. The parking garage was dark and mostly empty, just a few cars scattered around. I headed for my car, parked in a corner on the second level. The footsteps got louder, closer. I reached my car and fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking. As I unlocked the door, I saw him out of the corner of my eye. A man, drenched from the rain, his face obscured by a hood. He was walking straight towards me. I jumped into the car and locked the doors, my breath coming in short gasps. He reached my window and knocked on it, hard. I could see his face now, pale and expressionless. "Open the door," he said, his voice muffled by the glass. I shook my head, my hands gripping the steering wheel. He pounded on the window again, harder this time. "Open the door," he repeated, more forcefully. I started the car, my mind racing. I had to get out of there. As I put the car in reverse, he moved to the back, blocking my way. I hesitated, not wanting to hit him, but he didn't move. Suddenly, he pulled something from his coat. A crowbar. He swung it at the window, shattering the glass. I screamed and hit the gas, the car lurching backward. He jumped out of the way, and I sped out of the parking spot, my tires squealing on the wet concrete. I didn't look back as I drove down the ramp, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached the exit and turned onto the street, the rain coming down even harder now. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see him following me. I drove straight to the police station, my hands still shaking. I ran inside and told them everything. They took my statement and sent a patrol car to the garage, but they didn't find him. They said they would keep an eye out, but I knew he was gone. I went home that night, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard the sound of the crowbar hitting the window. I kept thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't gotten away. The next day, I called my boss and told him what happened. He understood and let me work from home for a while. I couldn't bring myself to go back to that garage. I started taking extra precautions, always looking over my shoulder, always making sure I wasn't being followed. The police never caught him, and I never saw him again. It was pouring rain that night, the kind of rain that makes it hard to see even with the wipers on full speed. I was driving back home from my mom's place with my daughter, Lily, in the back seat. The road was slick, and the wind was howling through the trees lining the narrow road. We were about 10 miles from home when the car suddenly skidded. I tried to correct the steering, but it was too late. The car slid off the road and into a ditch, sinking into the mud with a sickening thud. Lily was scared but unhurt, thank God. I tried to drive out, but the tires just spun in the mud. I reached for my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. I told Lily to stay in the car while I checked if there was any way to get the car moving. As I stepped out, the rain drenched me instantly. The mud was thick and sticky, clinging to my shoes with every step. I was inspecting the tires when I saw headlights approaching. A wave of relief washed over me. Maybe they could help pull us out. The car stopped, and a man stepped out. He was tall and had a hood pulled over his head, making it hard to see his face. "Need some help?" he called out over the sound of the rain. "Yes, please," I replied. "My car's stuck in the mud. Can you help us?" He walked over, and as he got closer, I felt a strange sense of unease. There was something off about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. But I was desperate. "I have a rope in my truck," he said. "I can pull you out." He went back to his truck, and I turned to check on Lily. She was watching from the back seat, her wide eyes filled with worry. I tried to smile reassuringly, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. The man came back with a rope and started attaching it to the front of my car. He worked in silence, his movements quick and precise. Once he was done, he got back into his truck and started pulling. The car lurched forward, but it didn't budge much. The mud was too deep. He got out of the truck again and walked over. "It's not working," he said, his tone flat. "We'll need to try something else." I nodded, unsure of what to say. He walked closer, and I noticed a glint in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. "Why don't you and the kid come wait in my truck? It's warm and dry." Something about his suggestion set off alarm bells in my head. "No, we're fine," I said quickly. "We'll stay here." His expression darkened. "It's not safe out here," he insisted, stepping closer. "You need to come with me." I took a step back, my heart pounding. "No, thank you," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll be fine." He grabbed my arm, his grip tight and painful. "I'm not asking," he growled. "You're coming with me." Panic surged through me. I twisted out of his grip and ran to the car, locking the doors behind me. Lily was crying, and I tried to calm her down while fumbling for my phone. Still no signal. The man was pounding on the window now, shouting for me to open the door. I ignored him and started the car, hoping against hope that we could somehow get free. The tires spun uselessly, and I felt tears of frustration and fear welling up. Then, a miracle. Another set of headlights appeared down the road. The man stopped pounding and turned to face the new car. I honked the horn desperately, hoping to get their attention. The car stopped, and two men got out. They looked from me to the man and seemed to understand the situation immediately. "Is there a problem here?" one of them called out. The man backed away from the window, muttering something under his breath. He glanced at me one last time, his eyes full of anger, before walking back to his truck. He drove off without another word. The two men walked over to my car. "Are you okay?" one of them asked. I nodded, still shaken. "Yes, thank you." He was trying to get us to go with him. They looked at each other and then back at me. "Let's get you out of here," the other man said. They hooked up their truck to my car and managed to pull it free from the mud. Once we were back on the road, I thanked them repeatedly. They offered to follow us home to make sure we got there safely, and I gratefully accepted. Lily was still scared, but I promised her we were safe now. We made it home without any further incidents. I never found out who that man was or what he wanted, but I'm grateful to those two men who showed up when they did. It was pouring rain the night I checked into the hotel. I had been driving for hours, and the storm made the roads too dangerous to continue. The hotel looked pretty standard, nothing fancy, but it was dry and had a bed, which was all I needed. I walked to the front desk, dripping wet, and rang the bell. The night receptionist appeared almost instantly, as if he had been waiting just out of sight. He was a tall, thin man with pale skin and dark hair. His name tag read Ethan. There was something off about the way he smiled at me, but I was too tired to think much of it. He asked for my name and ID, which I handed over. He typed my information into the computer, then looked up at me and said, "Jenna, right? Here for one night?" I nodded, thinking it was normal for him to know since I just gave him my ID. He handed me the key card and told me my room number. "If you need anything, just call the front desk," he said with that same unsettling smile. I thanked him and made my way to the elevator. When I got to my room, I felt a little uneasy, but I chalked it up to exhaustion and the creepy vibe from the receptionist. The room was fine, clean, and simple. I took a hot shower to warm up and climbed into bed. As I was drifting off, I thought I heard footsteps outside my door, but when I listened closer, there was nothing. I figured it was just other guests walking by. In the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. I couldn't figure out why at first. Then, I heard it, a faint clicking sound, like a door closing quietly. My heart started pounding. I lay still, straining to hear more. There were soft footsteps, moving slowly away from my room. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe someone going back to their room. The next morning, I felt uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went down to the lobby for breakfast and saw Ethan at the front desk. He smiled at me and said, "Good morning, Jenna. Did you sleep well?" His knowing smile made me feel exposed, like he knew something I didn't. I brushed it off and spent the day out, trying to forget about it. When I returned that night, Ethan was still there. He greeted me with that same unsettling smile. "Back already? How was your day?" I mumbled something polite and hurried to the elevator. That night, I locked the door and put a chair against it for good measure. I felt silly but safer. As I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise made me jump. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, the soft click of a door and quiet footsteps. My heart raced. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I wanted to get up and check, but I was frozen with fear. Minutes felt like hours. Eventually, the footsteps moved away, and I heard the faint click of a door closing again. I stayed awake the rest of the night, terrified. In the morning, I went down to check out. Ethan was there, smiling. "Leaving already?" he asked. I nodded, not wanting to engage. As I handed over the key card, he said, "I hope you had a restful stay, Jenna." His smile sent chills down my spine. As I walked out to my car, I noticed a small piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. It was a note, written in neat handwriting. "I hope you come back soon." No signature, but I knew it was from Ethan. I got in my car and drove away as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was miles away from that hotel. The whole drive, I couldn't stop thinking about how he knew my name and how he had been outside my room at night. I realized then that he must have had a master key. He had been in my room while I slept. I never reported it. I just wanted to forget it ever happened. But every time I stay in a hotel now, I can't help but remember that night and wonder if someone is watching me. Last month, I stayed at a hotel for a work conference. I checked in late and was exhausted, so I went straight to bed. The room was quiet, and I fell asleep quickly. In the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. I heard something unusual, a faint rustling noise. I turned on the lamp next to my bed and noticed something alarming. There was someone lying on the floor across the room. I was confused and terrified. I jumped out of bed and moved closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The stranger looked disheveled and seemed to be sleeping soundly. I could barely make out his features in the dim light, but he was definitely not someone I recognized. I checked the door. It was still locked. I didn't know how he got in. Panicking, I shook him awake. He groggily opened his eyes and looked at me, startled. "What are you doing in my room?" I demanded. He seemed disoriented and mumbled something about being in the wrong room. I didn't believe him for a second. I demanded that he get up and leave. As he stumbled to his feet, I noticed he had a key card in his hand. It was a master key card, the kind that can open any door in the hotel. My mind raced. How did he get that? I told him to leave and followed him out of the room, keeping a safe distance. He didn't argue and quickly went down the hall and disappeared into the stairwell. Shaking, I went to the front desk to report what had happened. The night clerk, a young man named Tom, listened to my story with a forced expression of concern. When I mentioned the master key card, his face went pale. He assured me someone would investigate it, but his demeanor seemed off. I decided to investigate myself. I returned to my room and looked through the small drawer where the hotel's guest information was kept. I found an old list of employees and their duties. It seemed Tom was listed as a night auditor, which meant he had access to the master key cards. Feeling uneasy, I decided to call the local police. They arrived quickly and started questioning Tom. They told me they had received complaints before about missing items and unauthorized access in various rooms. It seemed that Tom had been giving out spare key cards to strangers for money. The police took Tom into custody, and the hotel manager apologized profusely, assuring me that they would tighten their security and review their procedures. I was relieved but still shaken. I had no idea what could have happened if I hadn't woken up. The police also found other guests who had been affected, and they were informed. The next day, I checked out of the hotel and moved to a different one. I'm still unsettled by how easily things could have gone wrong. I had checked into a motel for the night, a small place off the highway, nothing fancy. I just needed a place to rest. The walls were thin, and I could hear murmurs from the room next door. At first, I thought it was just a normal conversation, but then I caught snippets that made my blood run cold. They were talking about something big, something illegal. I heard them mention names I recognized from the news, high-profile criminals. My heart started pounding. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was none of my business. But the more I listened, the clearer it became. They were planning something dangerous. I moved closer to the wall, trying to hear better. One voice stood out, deep and commanding. He was giving orders, talking about shipments and payments. Another voice was nervous, asking questions, seeking reassurance. They were talking about a deal going down the next day. I felt a knot in my stomach. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, and I jumped back. The room next door fell silent. I held my breath, hoping they hadn't heard me. Then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving towards the door. My heart was racing, and I backed away from the wall, trying to act natural. A moment later, there was a knock on my door. I froze, not sure what to do. The knock came again, harder this time. I knew I couldn't ignore it. I opened the door a crack, peering out. A tall man in a dark suit was standing there, his eyes cold and hard. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He stared at me for a moment, then said, "We heard some noise from your room. Everything okay in here?" I nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, just watching TV. Sorry if I was too loud. He didn't seem convinced. He glanced around the room, then looked back at me. Keep it down, he said, then turned and walked away. I closed the door, my hands shaking. I knew I had to get out of there. I quickly packed my things, trying to be as quiet as possible. I didn't want to draw any more attention to myself. I could still hear them talking next door, but now their voices were lower, more guarded. I slipped out of my room and headed for the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the lobby, I saw the man in the suit talking to the desk clerk. I ducked behind a pillar, trying to stay out of sight. I could hear them talking about me, describing my appearance. They knew I had heard them, and they weren't going to let me leave. I knew I had to get to my car and get out of there. I waited until the man in the suit walked away, then I made a run for it. The rain was pouring down, and I slipped on the wet pavement, but I didn't stop. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. Just as I got the door open, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw the man in the suit coming towards me, his face twisted with anger. I jumped into the car and locked the doors, then started the engine. He pounded on the window, shouting at me to open the door. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I threw the car into reverse and backed out of the parking space, then sped out of the lot. I could see him in the rearview mirror, watching me as I drove away. I didn't slow down until I was miles away, my heart still racing. I drove to the nearest police station and told them everything. They took my statement and assured me they would investigate. I knew it wasn't over, though. Those men knew who I was, and they wouldn't forget. I had heard too much, and now I was a target. The police put me in touch with a safe house, a place where I could stay until it was safe. I spent the next few days looking over my shoulder, jumping at every noise. I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever, but for now, I was safe. The police eventually caught the criminals, and they were arrested. I don't stay in motels anymore, and I don't eavesdrop on conversations. I learned my lesson that night. Sometimes, it's better not to know. I was staying at a hotel with my friend, Sarah. We were in town for a concert, just a weekend trip to have some fun. We got our room keys, went up to our room, and settled in. The hotel wasn't anything fancy, just a typical mid-range place, but it was clean and comfortable. After a long day of travel, we decided to get some sleep. Sarah said she was going to grab a drink from the vending machine down the hall. I was tired and told her I'd wait for her in the room. She grabbed her tea and left. I lay down on the bed, scrolling through my phone to pass the time. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I started to get worried. Sarah wasn't the type to take this long for something simple. I got up and went to the door, opened it, and looked down the hallway. It was empty. I called out her name, but there was no answer. My heart started to pound in my chest. I stepped out of the room and walked to the vending machines. No sign of her. I went down to the front desk and asked if they'd seen her. The night clerk gave me a puzzled look and said no one matching her description had come by. I insisted she was just getting a drink. The clerk checked the security cameras but said they didn't see anyone in the hallways or near the vending machines. Panic set in. I went back to the room, hoping she'd return. An hour passed. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Something was very wrong. I decided to go back to the front desk and demand they take another look. This time, a different clerk was there. I explained everything again, and they checked the records. According to their system, Sarah had never checked in. They had no record of her at all. I was furious and scared. I knew she was here. I had seen her walk out of the room. The clerk suggested I might be mistaken. Maybe she checked into another hotel. But I knew that wasn't true. I went back to the room, trying to think. As I sat there, I noticed something strange. A piece of paper sticking out from under the bed. I pulled it out and saw it was a business card for a local nightclub. It seemed out of place. I decided to investigate. The nightclub was a seedy place in a rundown part of town. I showed the card to the bouncer, and he let me in without a word. The inside was dark and loud, filled with smoke and the smell of alcohol. I felt out of place and nervous, but I had to find Sarah. I wandered around, asking people if they'd seen her. Most ignored me, but one man pulled me aside. He said he saw a girl matching her description with a group of men. He told me they were part of a trafficking ring operating out of the hotel. My blood ran cold. He warned me to leave and forget I ever saw anything. But I couldn't just leave Sarah. I went back to the hotel, my mind racing. I needed a plan. I couldn't trust the staff, and I couldn't call the police without proof. I decided to check the basement, thinking maybe there was more to this place. I found a door marked employees only and managed to slip inside when no one was looking. The basement was dark and damp, filled with storage boxes and cleaning supplies. I carefully made my way through, trying not to make any noise. At the far end, I saw a door slightly ajar with light spilling out. I crept closer and peeked inside. My heart nearly stopped. There were several men inside, talking in hushed tones. I saw Sarah, tied to a chair, looking terrified. I knew I had to act fast. I quietly backed away and looked for something to use as a weapon. I found a heavy metal pipe and gripped it tightly. I waited for the right moment, then burst into the room, swinging the pipe with all my strength. I caught one of the men off guard, knocking him to the ground. The others turned to me, shocked. I yelled at Sarah to run. She struggled to her feet, and I fought off the men as best I could. We managed to escape the room and run back upstairs. We burst out of the basement and into the lobby. I screamed for help, and this time, a few guests took notice. I had been hiking all day, and the rain started coming down hard as evening approached. I was in the middle of the woods, far from any town or road. The trail was muddy, and I was soaked. I needed to find shelter quickly. That's when I saw the cabin through the trees. It looked old and abandoned, but it was better than being out in the storm. I pushed through the wet underbrush and reached the cabin. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as I pushed it open. Inside, it was dark and smelled musty. I shook off the rain and stepped in, hoping to find a dry spot to rest. I found an old chair and a table, some broken shelves, and a small fireplace. There were no lights, but I had a flashlight in my pack. I set my things down and explored a bit. The cabin was just one room, with a couple of small windows. The rain pounded on the roof, and the wind howled outside. I felt a bit uneasy, but it was better than being out in the storm. I decided to make a small fire to warm up and dry off. As I was gathering some old wood from a pile in the corner, I noticed something odd. There were fresh food wrappers and an empty water bottle under the table. It looked like someone had been here recently. My heart started to race. What if they came back? I tried to calm myself, thinking it could have been a hiker like me, seeking shelter from the rain. I lit the fire and warmed my hands. The small flickering flames cast shadows on the walls, making the cabin feel even more eerie. I decided to stay close to the door, just in case. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and it was getting darker. I sat in the chair, trying to relax, but every creak and groan of the cabin made me jump. A loud noise from outside made me freeze. I turned off my flashlight and listened. Footsteps. Someone was coming. Panic set in. I looked around for a place to hide. There was a small closet near the back wall. I grabbed my things and slipped inside, closing the door as quietly as I could. I could hear voices now, muffled by the rain. Two men, talking and laughing. The door creaked open, and I held my breath. They stomped inside, shaking off the rain. I peeked through a crack in the closet door and saw them clearly. They were big, rough-looking men, and they carried guns. They started talking about a deal, something about money and a meeting place. My heart pounded in my chest. These weren't just hikers. They were criminals. I was trapped in their hideout, and they had no idea I was there. I needed to get out, but how? One of the men walked over to the fireplace, noticing the warm embers. "Someone's been here," he said, his voice gruff. My stomach dropped. They knew. I tried to stay as still and quiet as possible, but my mind was racing. What would they do if they found me? The other man cursed and started looking around. I could hear them opening drawers and moving things. They were getting closer to the closet. I pressed myself against the back wall, praying they wouldn't find me. The door handle turned, and I held my breath. The door swung open, and I saw the man's face. He froze for a second, then his eyes widened. "What the hell?" he shouted, reaching for me. I didn't think, just acted. I shoved past him, knocking him off balance, and ran for the door. The other man shouted and lunged at me, but I ducked and sprinted out into the rain. I didn't look back. I just ran. The rain was blinding, and the forest was dark, but I kept going. I could hear them behind me, crashing through the trees, shouting. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they would give out, but I didn't stop. I needed to find help, get away from them. I stumbled down a hill, slipping in the mud, and crashed into a stream. The cold water shocked me, but I kept going, following the stream, hoping it would lead me to safety. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, and I risked a glance back. They weren't there. I kept moving, more carefully now, trying to stay hidden. The stream led to a dirt road, and I followed it, praying for a car or a house, anything. After what felt like hours, I saw headlights. I waved frantically, and the car stopped. It was a ranger. I told him everything, barely able to speak from exhaustion and fear. He took me to the nearest station, where I finally felt safe. They never found the men or the cabin. I still think about that night, how close I came to being caught. I haven't been back to the woods since. I took a seat at a table near the back, away from the few people inside. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through some messages. I wasn't paying much attention when two men walked in. They didn't look any different from the usual late-night crowd, so I didn't think much of it. They took a seat at the booth behind me, and I could hear them talking in low voices. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their conversation caught my attention. "Everything's set for tomorrow night," one of them said. His voice was rough, like he'd been smoking all his life. "You sure no one's gonna be there?" the other one asked. He sounded nervous, jittery. "Positive. The place will be empty. We go in, get the cash, and get out. Easy job." My heart started pounding. They were talking about a robbery. I tried to keep my cool and not let on that I was listening. I glanced around the diner, but no one else seemed to notice. The men kept talking, going over details, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They mentioned a warehouse and a lot of money. Then, I made the mistake of shifting slightly in my chair. The noise must have caught their attention. The talking stopped, and I could feel their eyes on me. I didn't dare look back. "Did you hear something?" the nervous one asked. "Yeah," the rough voice replied. "Hey, you." I tried to act casual as I turned around. "Yeah." "What are you doing back here?" the rough one asked. He had a hard look in his eyes that made my stomach drop. "Just waiting for my coffee," I said, trying to sound calm. "You hear anything you shouldn't have?" he asked, leaning forward. "No, just minding my own business," I lied. He stared at me for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Make sure it stays that way." I nodded and turned back around, my heart racing. I needed to get out of there. My coffee came, and I quickly paid, leaving a generous tip for the waitress. As I walked out, I could feel their eyes on me. I kept my pace steady until I was outside, then hurried to my car. Once I was safely inside, I called the police and told them everything. They took down the details and said they'd look into it. I drove home, constantly checking my rearview mirror to make sure I wasn't being followed. I couldn't sleep that night. Every noise made me jump. I kept thinking about those men and what they might do if they found out I'd reported them. The next day, I went to work as usual, but I was on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder. A few days later, I was walking to my car after my shift when I noticed a man standing across the street, watching me. It was the nervous one from the diner. Panic surged through me. I quickly got into my car and drove off, trying to stay calm. I drove around for a while, making sure I wasn't being followed before heading home. That night, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't want to answer, but something told me I should. When I picked up, no one spoke. I could hear breathing on the other end, then a click as they hung up. I knew it was them. They knew where I lived. I called the police again, but they said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. They advised me to stay vigilant and report any suspicious activity. It wasn't much comfort. For the next few days, I was a wreck. I barely slept, and when I did, I had nightmares about those men finding me. I saw the nervous one a couple more times, always watching from a distance. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped, always looking over my shoulder. Then, one night, I heard a noise outside my apartment. It was late, and the neighborhood was quiet. I peeked out the window and saw a shadowy figure standing by my car. My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator what was happening. The figure moved towards my building, and I knew I couldn't stay. I slipped out the back door and ran to a neighbor's house, banging on the door until they let me in. I was traveling alone for a work conference, staying in a mid-range hotel that seemed nice enough. My flight was delayed, so I arrived late, checked in, and headed straight to my room. I was exhausted and just wanted to get some sleep. The next morning, I unpacked my suitcase, setting my clothes and toiletries around the room. Everything seemed fine. After a full day of meetings, I returned to my room, looking forward to a quiet evening. But when I walked in, my suitcase was gone. I searched everywhere, thinking maybe I moved it and forgot. The room was small, and it quickly became clear it wasn't there. I went down to the front desk to report it missing. The woman at the desk, Alice, seemed genuinely concerned at first. She asked if I might have left it somewhere else. I explained I had unpacked it in my room that morning. She assured me they would look into it and suggested I might have just misplaced it. That was frustrating. How could I misplace a whole suitcase? I went back to my room, trying to stay calm. I had valuables in that suitcase, my laptop, some jewelry, and important documents for the conference. A few hours later, Alice called to say they hadn't found anything but would keep searching. She suggested I might have left it in a conference room or maybe the hotel bar. I knew that wasn't the case, but I checked anyway. Nothing. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the day in my head, trying to figure out what happened. The next morning, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started asking around, talking to other guests and staff members, hoping someone saw something. Most people were sympathetic but had no information. Around midday, I spoke with one of the cleaning staff, an older lady named Maria. She mentioned seeing a young man, one of the newer employees, hanging around my floor more than usual. She thought it was odd but didn't think much of it at the time. My heart raced. I had a lead. I went back to Alice with this new information. She seemed skeptical but promised to look into it. I decided to follow up myself. I started watching the hotel staff, particularly the newer employees. It didn't take long to notice a young man, maybe in his mid-20s, who seemed a bit too interested in the guests and their rooms. His name tag said David. I saw him hovering near rooms after guests left, always with an excuse if anyone asked. I followed him discreetly for a while, hoping to catch him in the act. My gut told me he was the one. That evening, I saw David enter a guest's room with a master key card. My heart pounded as I crept closer. He emerged a few minutes later, carrying a small bag. I knew I had to act. I waited until he left, then quickly went to Alice with what I saw. Alice looked shocked and called hotel security. They caught David red-handed, and under questioning, he admitted to stealing from multiple guests, including me. He had been using the master key card to enter rooms when guests were out. My suitcase was found in a storage closet along with other stolen items. The hotel manager apologized profusely and assured me they would take action to prevent this from happening again. They offered me a free stay, but I just wanted to get out of there. I packed my things and checked out, relieved to be leaving but still shaken. I learned later that David was arrested, and the hotel implemented stricter security measures. I was grateful to get my belongings back, but the experience left me wary. I arrived at the Airbnb late, the rain pouring down in sheets. It had been a long drive, and all I wanted was to get inside and dry off. The place looked cozy in the pictures, and when I finally pulled up, it seemed all right. A small cottage tucked away from the main road, lights glowing warmly inside. I grabbed my bags and hurried to the door. The owner, Paul, greeted me. He seemed friendly enough, though there was something about his smile that made me uneasy. I brushed it off as paranoia. It had been a stressful week. I thanked him, took the keys, and stepped inside. The place was charming, just like the photos. Rustic furniture, a fireplace, and the soft patter of rain on the roof. I unpacked my things and tried to relax, but the unease lingered. I chalked it up to the storm outside and decided to take a shower. After I finished, I went to lock the front door. That's when I noticed it. The lock was on the outside. My heart skipped a beat. I checked the other doors and windows. All of them had the same setup. Locks on the outside, none on the inside. Panic set in. I tried calling Paul, but my phone had no signal. The Wi-Fi wasn't working either. I felt trapped. The rain pounded harder, and the wind howled through the trees. I needed to think. I needed to find a way out without letting him know I was onto him. I remembered seeing a small window in the bathroom that might be big enough to crawl through. Quietly, I made my way there. I tried opening it, but it was painted shut. I started to panic again, but I knew I had to stay calm. I looked around for something to break the glass. There was a heavy candle holder on the sink. I grabbed it and, with a silent prayer, swung it at the window. The glass shattered, and I froze, listening for any signs that Paul had heard. Nothing. I cleared away the shards and tried to squeeze through. It was a tight fit, but I managed to get my upper body out. That's when I heard footsteps. I scrambled, pushing myself the rest of the way out. I fell into the mud outside, the rain soaking me instantly. I didn't have time to think about it. I got up and ran. The trees were dense, and the darkness made it hard to see. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my heart pounding in my chest. I heard a door slam behind me and knew Paul was coming. I had to keep moving. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would give out. I found a small clearing and hid behind a fallen log, trying to catch my breath. I could hear Paul shouting, calling my name, his voice getting closer. I needed to find help, but I didn't know where I was. I decided to keep heading away from the cottage, hoping I'd find a road or another house. I moved as quietly as I could, every sound making my heart race. After what felt like hours, I saw lights through the trees. A house. I crept closer, praying someone was home. I reached the edge of the yard and saw a car in the driveway. I ran to the front door and banged on it, hoping whoever was inside would help me. The door opened, and an older woman stood there, looking confused and worried. I tried to explain what happened, but I was out of breath and soaking wet. She let me in and called the police. I could hear Paul's shouts in the distance, but I knew I was safe now. The police arrived quickly, and I told them everything. They found Paul searching the woods near the cottage. He tried to deny everything, but they found evidence in the house that backed up my story. Hidden cameras, restraints, things that made my skin crawl. I never found out what Paul's true intentions were, and I didn't want to. I just wanted to forget the whole ordeal. The police assured me he would be locked up for a long time, but it didn't make me feel much better. The rain had stopped by the time I left the police station. A friend picked me up and drove me home. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, listening to every creak and rustle, afraid that somehow Paul would find me. I knew it was irrational, but after that night, I couldn't help but feel that I was never truly safe. I recently stayed at a hotel while on a business trip. It was a last-minute booking, and the place seemed decent enough. When I checked in, everything seemed normal. The front desk clerk was friendly, and my room was clean. I settled in and decided to relax after a long drive. That night, I noticed something odd. The carpet in the corner of my room seemed uneven. It looked like there was a slight bulge under it. Out of curiosity, I lifted the corner of the carpet and saw what looked like a small latch. It was rusted and old, but it was definitely a latch. My heart raced as I tried to figure out what it was. After a few moments of hesitation, I decided to open it. To my surprise, there was a trapdoor underneath. It was heavy, but I managed to lift it with some effort. Underneath was a narrow, dark passageway. The thought of a hidden tunnel was unsettling, but my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight from my bag and decided to explore. The tunnel was cramped and musty. It seemed to stretch on for a while. As I walked, the air grew cooler, and the sound of my footsteps echoed eerily. I noticed that the walls were lined with old, dirty bricks. The tunnel seemed to lead deeper underground. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a fork in the tunnel. I chose the left path, which led to a small, dimly lit room. The room was cluttered with old furniture, filing cabinets, and boxes. There were also several security monitors displaying various areas of the hotel. My blood ran cold when I realized what I was looking at. The cameras were showing live feeds of different parts of the hotel, including my own room. Panic set in. I quickly turned back and retraced my steps, trying to stay calm. As I moved, I heard voices coming from deeper within the tunnels. I recognized the voices from earlier when I had passed by the front desk. They sounded like they were coming from a group of men discussing something in low tones. I made my way back to the trapdoor and pulled it open. I climbed out and put the carpet back in place, trying to make it look like nothing had happened. My heart was pounding, and I was terrified. I had to get out of that hotel as quickly as possible. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. I told them everything I had seen and heard. They arrived within minutes and took over. They went into the tunnel while I waited outside with a sense of dread. After a while, they came back and confirmed my worst fears. The tunnel was part of a network used by criminals for various illegal activities, including unauthorized surveillance and possibly other crimes. The hotel manager was informed, and the entire place was shut down for an investigation. I was given a full refund and promised that the matter would be dealt with. I had to stay in another hotel for the rest of my trip. The experience left me shaken, and I couldn't stop thinking about how easily things could have gone horribly wrong. I'm still not sure how the trapdoor ended up in my room or how long the tunnel had been in use. All I know is that it was a close call. I decided to stay at the rundown motel on the edge of town for a few nights while covering a story on local crime. The place was cheap and unremarkable, exactly what I needed for a few days of reporting. It was clear from the start that the motel was worn out, flickering lights, peeling paint, and a distinct musty smell. But it was close to where I needed to be, so I didn't think much of it. The first night was uneventful. I spent most of it going through my notes and organizing interviews. By the second night, though, things started to get strange. I was working late, typing away on my laptop when I heard voices from the adjacent room. It wasn't unusual for a place like this, but the low, tense tone of the conversation caught my attention. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just another argument or some loud guests. But then I heard something that made me sit up. There was mention of a shipment and pickup. The words sounded urgent, almost like a deal was about to go down. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I peered through the peephole but saw nothing. I then crept to the window and looked outside. I saw a couple of unmarked cars parked nearby, and several people moving in and out of the room next to mine. I couldn't see much more, so I decided to step outside and investigate from a safer distance. As I walked toward the cars, I saw a man in a suit talking to two other men who looked out of place in the neighborhood. My instincts told me something was off, but I tried to stay calm and blend into the background. Just then, I saw a couple of large duffel bags being unloaded from one of the cars. I was about to turn back when I noticed a figure watching me from the corner of the building. It was a tall man in a dark coat. I froze. He looked right at me and then nodded towards the door of the room next to mine. I knew I had been spotted. My heart raced as I turned to head back to my room, but the man was already moving toward me. I made it back to my room and locked the door, trying to keep my breathing steady. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, but as I was about to speak, a loud knock came from the door. I jumped and looked through the peephole. It was the man from outside, looking directly at me. Panic set in. I hung up the phone and backed away from the door. The knock turned into banging, and I heard muffled voices demanding I open up. I knew they were after me now. I grabbed my laptop and phone and tried to find another exit, but the only other door led to a stairwell that might be a trap. I listened carefully and heard sirens approaching. The noise outside escalated as police cars arrived and officers began shouting. It sounded like a full-scale operation was unfolding. I realized the man from earlier must have been part of the criminal operation and that the whole scene was much bigger than I had thought. The banging at my door stopped. I peeked through the peephole again and saw that the man was gone. I quickly made my way to the back exit, which was a small, poorly lit alley. I could see officers and criminals in a standoff from a distance. I needed to get out of there before things got even worse. I darted down the alley, staying close to the walls, and made my way to a nearby street where I could call for a ride. My hands were shaking as I waited for the car to arrive. When it finally did, I got in and directed the driver to a safer part of town. Once I was in a safer place, I reached out to my editor and briefed them on everything that happened. The situation was chaotic, but it was clear I had narrowly avoided a dangerous encounter. The police later confirmed that they had arrested several people involved in the operation, and it was a major bust. My car broke down last night. It was raining hard, really pouring. I was on a desolate road, no lights, no other cars, just me in the storm. I managed to get off to the side, but it didn't help much. My phone barely had any signal, but I got through to a tow truck. They said it would be hours before they could get to me. I sat there for a while, the rain hammering down on the roof. It was cold, and I was starting to feel the chill. I kept glancing at the phone, hoping the tow truck would somehow show up early. Then, out of nowhere, headlights appeared behind me. A car pulled up, and a man got out, umbrella in hand. He knocked on my window. "Need some help?" he asked. He looked normal enough, middle-aged, dressed for the weather. I hesitated but then rolled down the window a bit. "I've got a tow truck coming," I said. "But it'll be hours." He nodded, looking around. "You can't stay out here in this weather. I can give you a ride to the nearest town. It's just a few miles up the road." I was desperate to get out of the rain, and he seemed genuine. I grabbed my bag and got out, locking the car behind me. He led me to his car, a beat-up old sedan, and opened the passenger door for me. I got in, and he got behind the wheel. As we started driving, I tried to make small talk to ease my nerves. "Thank you for stopping. Not many people would in this weather." He smiled but didn't say much. We drove in silence for a bit, the rain pounding on the roof. After a while, I noticed we weren't heading toward any town. The road was getting narrower and rougher. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "To a safer place," he said, not looking at me. My heart started to race. "But you said the town was just a few miles away." He didn't respond. I glanced around, looking for anything that might help me. The doors were locked, and the windows wouldn't budge. I kept my hand on my bag, where I had my phone, but there was still no signal. The road got even rougher, and the car slowed down. I saw a clearing up ahead, but no buildings, no lights. Just trees and darkness. He pulled over and turned off the engine. "Why are we stopping here?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He turned to me, his eyes cold. "You'll be safer here," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. I knew I had to get out. I fumbled with the door handle, but it wouldn't open. He reached over, grabbing my arm. I twisted away, using my other hand to hit the horn, hoping someone would hear. "Stop it," he hissed, trying to pull me back. I kicked out, catching him off guard. He let go for a second, and I managed to unlock the door and tumble out into the rain. I hit the ground hard but got up quickly, running toward the trees. The rain was blinding, and the ground was slippery, but I kept running. I heard him shouting behind me, his footsteps getting closer. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I stumbled and fell, getting mud all over me. But I scrambled up and kept going. I couldn't see where I was going, just running blind. I could hear him behind me, but the rain was so loud it was hard to tell how close he was. I saw a light up ahead, faint but real. I pushed myself toward it, my legs burning. It was a cabin, old and run down, but the door was open. I rushed inside and slammed the door shut, locking it. There were no lights inside, just a dim glow from outside. I found a corner and hid, trying to catch my breath. I could hear him outside, yelling, but I stayed quiet. I prayed he wouldn't find me. After what felt like hours, the shouting stopped. I waited, terrified he might come back. But the rain kept falling, and eventually, I couldn't hear anything but the storm. I stayed in that cabin until morning. When the rain finally let up, I cautiously stepped outside. The man was gone, and there was no sign of his car. I started walking, sticking to the main road. It took me hours, but I finally found a ranger station and told them everything. They never found him. I don't know what he wanted, and I don't want to think about what might have happened if I hadn't escaped. I was driving alone on a long stretch of highway. The rain started coming down harder, making it difficult to see. The windshield wipers were going full speed, but it didn't seem to help much. The road was nearly deserted, and I felt a bit uneasy. It was the kind of night that made you wish you weren't alone. I saw a figure on the side of the road, drenched and holding out a thumb. Normally, I wouldn't pick up a hitchhiker, but the weather was awful, and I felt a pang of sympathy. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I asked. He smiled, his face partly hidden by the hood of his jacket. "Yes, please. It's miserable out here." He climbed in, bringing a wave of cold, wet air with him. I turned up the heat and started driving again. We exchanged small talk at first. His name was Mike. He seemed friendly enough, talking about the weather and his bad luck with his car breaking down. I felt more relaxed with him in the car, the company breaking the monotony of the drive. But as the rain got heavier, something in his demeanor changed. His responses became shorter, his tone more serious. I tried to keep the conversation going, but it felt forced. There was a tension in the air that I couldn't quite place. Suddenly, he reached over and locked the car doors. I glanced at him, my heart starting to race. "Why did you do that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "For safety," he replied, but there was something unsettling in his voice. He turned to face me, his eyes cold and calculating. "Keep driving." Fear gripped me. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He pulled a knife from his jacket and held it up where I could see it. "Just keep driving," he said calmly. "And don't do anything stupid." My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. The rain was pounding on the roof, the road a blur in the headlights. I had to stay calm, had to think. "Where are we going?" I asked, hoping to buy some time. "There's a rest area a few miles up the road." "Pull in there," he ordered. I nodded, trying to keep my breathing steady. The rest area wasn't far, and I had to find a way to escape before we got there. I kept glancing at the road, looking for any opportunity. The rain made it hard to see, but I noticed a small dirt road coming up on the right. Without warning, I yanked the wheel and turned onto the dirt road. The car skidded in the mud, and Mike cursed, grabbing the dashboard for support. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. I didn't answer. I just kept driving, the car bouncing and sliding on the rough road. I could hear him fumbling with the knife, trying to steady himself. The dirt road wound through the trees, and I hoped it would lead to somewhere safe. "Stop the car," he demanded, his voice full of anger. He lunged at me, and I swerved, trying to throw him off balance. The knife grazed my arm, and I cried out in pain. I slammed on the brakes, the car sliding to a stop. I grabbed my bleeding arm and looked at him. He was panting, the knife still in his hand. "Get out," he ordered, pointing the knife at me. I didn't move. "Please, just let me go," I pleaded. He shook his head. "Get out," he repeated, more forcefully. I slowly opened the door and stepped out into the rain. It was freezing, the water soaking through my clothes instantly. Mike got out on his side, keeping the knife pointed at me. "Walk," he said, nodding toward the trees. I started walking, my mind racing. The rain was so heavy I could barely see a few feet ahead. I had to find a way to escape, to get away from him. He was right behind me, the knife glinting in the dim light. We walked for what felt like hours, the mud sucking at my shoes, the rain relentless. My arm throbbed where he had cut me, and I was starting to feel dizzy. I had to do something, had to find a way to get away. Suddenly, I heard a noise, a rustling in the trees. I stopped, turning to look. Mike grabbed my arm, pulling me forward. "Keep moving," he snapped. But the noise came again, closer this time. It sounded like footsteps. I glanced around, trying to see through the rain. "Someone's coming," I said, hoping it was true. Mike looked around, his grip on my arm tightening. "Shut up," he hissed. The footsteps were getting closer, and I could see a light bobbing through the trees. Mike cursed, pulling me toward the car. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice panicked. I saw my chance. I twisted out of his grip and ran toward the light, screaming for help. "Help! Please, help me!" The light stopped, and I heard a voice call out. "Who's there?" Mike was right behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran as fast as I could, the mud and rain slowing me down. I could hear him cursing, struggling to keep up. I burst through the trees and saw a figure holding a flashlight. It was a man, a hunter by the looks of it. "Help me!" I cried, running toward him. He looked confused for a moment, then saw Mike coming after me. He raised the flashlight, shining it in Mike's face. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Mike stopped, the knife still in his hand. "Just a misunderstanding," he said, trying to sound calm. The hunter wasn't buying it. He raised his rifle, pointing it at Mike. "Drop the knife," he ordered. Mike hesitated, then dropped the knife in the mud. The hunter kept the rifle trained on him, his eyes narrowing. "You okay, miss?" he asked me. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you," I whispered. The hunter kept the rifle on Mike as he called the police. They arrived quickly, taking Mike into custody. I was safe, but I knew I would never forget that night, the terror and the rain. I would never pick up a hitchhiker again. Not even for $1 million. It was pouring rain when I left the office that night. The storm had been building all day, and now it was a full-blown downpour. I hurried to my car, huddling under my umbrella, and saw Tom standing at the entrance. He looked soaked, even with his raincoat on. "Need a ride?" I called out. Tom smiled, relieved. "Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate it." He climbed into the passenger seat, and I cranked up the heat. We chatted about work as I navigated the slick roads. The rain was so heavy, it was hard to see beyond a few feet. The wipers were working overtime, but it barely made a difference. We came to a red light, and I glanced over at Tom. He seemed tense, his fingers drumming on his knee. "Everything okay?" I asked. He nodded, but didn't say anything. The light turned green, and I started to drive. A few blocks later, I noticed Tom wasn't in the car anymore. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard the door open or felt any movement. I pulled over, panic rising. How could he just disappear? I got out, looking around, calling his name. The rain was relentless, soaking me in seconds. There was no sign of him anywhere. I got back in the car, my mind racing. Did he jump out? Why didn't I hear anything? I decided to head back to the office, thinking maybe he had gone back there for some reason. When I arrived, the building was dark and locked up. I knocked on the door, hoping the night guard might have seen something. No answer. I was alone. I drove around the area, circling the blocks near where he vanished, but there was no sign of Tom. Feeling desperate, I called the police. They said they would send someone out to take a report, but their tone made it clear they thought he probably just decided to walk home. I sat in my car, shivering from the cold and the fear. Something was very wrong. I decided to go to Tom's apartment, hoping he might be there. When I got there, his lights were off. I banged on his door, but no one answered. As I turned to leave, a figure stepped out of the shadows. I jumped, recognizing one of Tom's neighbors. He looked at me with a mix of curiosity and concern. "You looking for Tom?" he asked. I nodded. "Have you seen him?" He shook his head. "Not since this morning." "Is something wrong?" I explained what had happened, and he looked even more worried. "Tom's been acting strange lately. He mentioned something about being followed, but I thought he was just stressed from work." The rain kept pounding down as I got back into my car. My phone rang, and I saw it was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Rachel," a voice said. It was Tom, but he sounded scared. "Tom, where are you?" "I don't have much time." "Don't trust them," he whispered. The line went dead. My hands were shaking as I tried to call him back, but it went straight to voicemail. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew I couldn't go to the police. They wouldn't believe me. I drove around aimlessly, trying to piece together what little I knew. My thoughts were interrupted by the sight of a black car that seemed to be following me. Every turn I made, it was right there behind me. Panic set in. I took a sharp turn down a side street and sped up, hoping to lose them. My heart was pounding as I navigated the narrow, rain-slicked roads. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the car still behind me. I drove towards the outskirts of town, hoping the winding roads would help me shake them. The car was relentless, though, staying on my tail. I saw a narrow dirt road and turned onto it, the car bouncing over the rough terrain. The road led into a dense forest. The trees closed in around me, and the headlights of the car behind me disappeared. I kept driving until I found a small clearing, then turned off my engine and lights, hoping they wouldn't find me. I sat there in the dark, the rain hammering on the roof, trying to calm my racing heart. I had to figure out what was happening and why Tom had disappeared. I couldn't go home, it wasn't safe. After what felt like hours, the rain finally started to let up. I decided to head back to town, keeping to the back roads. I needed answers, and the only place I could think of was Tom's apartment. When I arrived, the building was dark and quiet. I snuck in through a side door that I knew was always left unlocked. I crept up to Tom's apartment and picked the lock, a skill I had learned years ago and never thought I'd need. Inside, the place was a mess. Papers were scattered everywhere, and it looked like someone had been searching for something. I found Tom's laptop on the table and opened it, hoping for a clue. As I searched through his files, I found a folder marked Danger. Inside were documents and photos detailing some kind of conspiracy. There were pictures of people I recognized from around town, notes about meetings, and lists of names. It was all connected to some illegal activities that Tom had uncovered. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside the door. I quickly closed the laptop and hid behind the couch. The door creaked open, and I saw a pair of boots step inside. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. The person moved around the apartment, searching through the mess. After what felt like an eternity, they left, and I heard the door lock behind them. I waited a few minutes before coming out of my hiding spot. I grabbed Tom's laptop and slipped out of the apartment, heading back to my car. I needed to find a safe place to go through the files and figure out who I could trust. I drove to a nearby motel and checked in under a fake name. In the safety of my room, I opened the laptop again and went through everything. It was clear that Tom had stumbled onto something big, and now we were both targets. I knew I had to get this information to someone who could help, but I had to be careful. I spent the rest of the night making copies of the files and sending them to trusted contacts, hoping they would take it seriously. As dawn approached, I felt a little safer. The storm had passed, but I knew the danger wasn't over. I had to stay hidden until I could be sure the information was out and Tom was safe. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and fear. I moved from place to place, never staying in one spot for too long. I heard from one of my contacts that the information had been leaked to the press, and the authorities were investigating. Finally, I got a call from Tom. He was safe, hiding out in a different city. He thanked me for helping him, and we agreed to lay low until things blew over. It took months for the dust to settle, but eventually, the people behind the conspiracy were arrested, and things started to go back to normal. I never saw Tom again, but we kept in touch through encrypted messages. That rainy night changed everything. I learned to be more cautious, to trust my instincts, and to always be aware of my surroundings. The rain was coming down in sheets that night, drumming on the roof of my car as I pulled up to the old, abandoned warehouse. My job was to guard the place overnight, make sure no one broke in or did anything illegal. It seemed simple enough, but the storm added an eerie feel to the whole thing. I parked and grabbed my flashlight, pulling my coat tighter against the wind. The warehouse loomed in front of me, its broken windows and crumbling walls barely visible through the rain. I took a deep breath and headed inside, my boots squelching in the mud. Inside, the place was dark and cold. The only light came from my flashlight, which cast long, flickering shadows on the walls. The air was musty, and every sound seemed to echo. I checked the main floor first, making sure all the doors and windows were secure. Everything seemed fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I moved to the second floor, the stairs creaking under my weight. As I reached the top, I heard it, a faint noise coming from somewhere below. It sounded like whispers, or maybe the rustling of clothes. I froze, straining to hear over the pounding rain. The noise came again, clearer this time. Voices, definitely voices. I turned off my flashlight and crouched down, trying to stay hidden. The last thing I wanted was to confront whoever was down there without knowing how many there were. I made my way back to the stairs, moving as quietly as I could. The voices were louder now, coming from the far end of the warehouse. I crept closer, staying low and out of sight. As I peered around a corner, I saw them, a group of men, at least 4 or 5, huddled together and talking in low tones. They had crates stacked around them, and one of them was prying one open with a crowbar. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They were using the warehouse as a hideout. My heart pounded in my chest. I needed to get out and call for backup. I turned to leave, but my foot caught on a loose board. It creaked loudly, and I froze. The voices stopped, and I heard one of the men say, "Did you hear that?" Panic surged through me. I couldn't stay hidden here, and I couldn't make a run for it without them hearing. I spotted a small door to my left and slipped through it, finding myself in a narrow hallway. I moved quickly, looking for another way out. The hallway led to a small office. I ducked inside and shut the door quietly behind me. There was a window, but it was too high to climb through. I could hear the men moving around, their footsteps echoing in the empty warehouse. They were looking for me. I fumbled for my phone, my hand shaking. No signal. Of course. I needed to get outside, but the only way out was back through the warehouse. I listened at the door, trying to gauge where they were. They were getting closer. I had to think fast. There was an old desk in the office, and I squeezed underneath it, pulling a chair in front to hide myself. My breathing was loud in my ears, and I struggled to stay calm. The footsteps were right outside the door now. The door creaked open, and a beam of light swept the room. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. The light passed over the desk, and I heard one of them say, "Nothing here. Let's check the next room." The door closed, and their footsteps faded. I waited a few moments before crawling out from under the desk. I had to get out before they came back. I opened the door a crack and peered out. The hallway was empty. I moved quickly, heading back the way I came. The voices were distant now, coming from the other end of the warehouse. I reached the stairs and hurried down, keeping my flashlight off to avoid drawing attention. I was almost to the main door when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw one of the men, his flashlight beam catching me in its glare. "Hey!" he shouted. I bolted, my heart racing. I could hear him chasing me, his footsteps pounding on the concrete floor. I burst through the door and into the rain, the cold air hitting me like a slap in the face. I ran for my car, fumbling for my keys. I could hear the man shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. I reached the car, yanked the door open, and jumped inside. The engine roared to life, and I sped away, the tires slipping on the wet road. I drove until I found a spot with a signal and called the police. My hands were still shaking as I explained what had happened. They promised to send a unit out right away. I waited in my car, the rain still pounding down, until I saw the flashing lights of the police cars. They went in, and a few minutes later, they came out with the men in handcuffs. One of the officers came over to my car and told me it was safe now. I thanked him and drove home, my mind still reeling from the night's events. I knew I'd have to go back to the warehouse the next day, but for now, I was just grateful to be safe. It was a night like any other, except for the storm. The rain hammered against the windows, and the thunder seemed to shake the whole house. I was home alone, trying to finish some work in the living room. The power went out suddenly, plunging the house into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, using the flashlight to find my way around. I lit a few candles and placed them around the room, the flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. I felt a bit uneasy but chalked it up to the storm. The wind howled outside, and the old house creaked and groaned. I decided to go to bed, hoping the power would be back by morning. As I climbed the stairs, I heard a noise coming from downstairs. At first, I thought it was just the storm, but then I heard it again. A faint thud, like something being knocked over. My heart started to race. I knew every sound this house made, and this was different. I paused on the stairs, straining to hear. There it was again, louder this time. Someone was in my house. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I reached for my phone, but there was no signal. I was completely cut off. I crept back downstairs, my footsteps barely making a sound. I had to see what was going on. As I reached the bottom, I peered around the corner into the living room. The candles were still burning, casting long shadows. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone was in the kitchen. I picked up a heavy vase from a side table, gripping it tightly. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whoever was in the kitchen would hear it. I inched closer, trying to stay out of sight. I could hear rummaging, the sound of drawers being opened and closed. I took a deep breath and stepped into the kitchen, raising the vase above my head. The figure turned, and our eyes met. He was a large man, dressed in dark clothes, his face partially covered by a hood. He didn't seem startled to see me, just annoyed. "Who are you? What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He didn't answer, just took a step toward me. I swung the vase, but he was quicker. He grabbed my wrist, twisting it painfully until I dropped the vase. It shattered on the floor, the sound echoing through the house. He pushed me back, and I stumbled, falling to the ground. I scrambled to my feet, backing away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. The dim candlelight glinted off the blade. I felt a surge of panic. "Get out of my house!" I shouted, but he just smiled, a cold, sinister smile. I turned and ran, my bare feet slipping on the wooden floor. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. I made it to the stairs and took them two at a time, my only thought to get to my bedroom and lock the door. I slammed the door shut and locked it, leaning against it, trying to catch my breath. I could hear him coming up the stairs. I looked around for something to defend myself with. My eyes fell on the heavy dresser. I pushed it in front of the door, using all my strength. The doorknob rattled, and I heard him cursing. He started pounding on the door, the wood splintering under the force. I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I looked around the room, desperate for another way out. The only window was too high to jump from safely. I grabbed a lamp and stood by the door, ready to defend myself. The door burst open, the dresser shoved aside like it weighed nothing. He stepped into the room, knife in hand. I swung the lamp, catching him on the side of the head. He staggered, but didn't go down. He lunged at me, and I swung again, this time hitting his arm. The knife flew out of his hand, clattering to the floor. I didn't give him a chance to recover. I grabbed the knife and backed away, keeping it between us. "Leave now, or I'll use this," I warned, my voice steadier than I felt. He eyed the knife, then me, and for a moment, I thought he might listen. But then he lunged at me again. I slashed at him, catching him across the chest. He screamed in pain, but it only seemed to make him angrier. He tackled me, and we both went down. The knife slipped from my hand, and we wrestled on the floor. He was stronger, but I was fueled by pure adrenaline. I managed to get a knee into his stomach, pushing him off me. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed the knife again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I stabbed him in the leg, putting all my strength into it. He howled in pain, clutching his leg. I ran past him, out of the room, and down the stairs. I made it to the front door and yanked it open, running out into the storm. The rain was still pouring, but I didn't care. I ran to my neighbor's house, banging on the door. They let me in, and I called the police. By the time they arrived, the man was gone. They searched the house, but there was no sign of him. They said he must have been a drifter, looking for an easy target. But I knew it was more than that. He had planned this. I never spent another night alone in that house. I arrived back at my hotel room late that night, drenched from the rain. It had been a long day of meetings, and I was looking forward to a hot shower and some sleep. The hallway was quiet as I made my way to room 304. I swiped my keycard, opened the door, and stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the faint sound of someone moving inside. My heart skipped a beat. I flipped on the light and saw a man standing by my suitcase, rummaging through my belongings. He looked up, startled. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The man straightened up, holding a pair of my socks. I think there's been a mistake," he stammered. "They gave me this room. I was just checking in." My mind raced. How could someone else have access to my room? "Let me see your key card," I said, trying to sound assertive. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a card. It looked just like mine. "See? Room 304, he said, showing it to me. I took a step closer, feeling uneasy. Something was off. "Why are you going through my stuff then?" I asked, eyeing my scattered clothes and personal items. He hesitated, then gave a nervous laugh. "I was just looking for some dry clothes. I'm soaked." His excuse didn't make sense, but I didn't want to confront him directly. "Get out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll sort this out at the front desk." He didn't move. Instead, he looked at me with a strange intensity. "You know, you're right. This is your room," he said slowly. "But it's raining hard outside. Maybe you could help me out." My stomach churned. "Help you out? With what?" I asked, inching toward the door. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just let me stay here tonight. I'll be gone by morning." I shook my head. "No, you need to leave now." His smile faded. "I don't think you understand," he said, his tone shifting. "I'm not asking." Fear gripped me as he took a step closer. I glanced at the door, calculating my chances of making a run for it. "Please, just go," I said, my voice shaking. He lunged at me, grabbing my wrist. I struggled, trying to pull away, but he was strong. "You're not going anywhere," he growled, pushing me toward the bed. I fought back, kicking and clawing at him. "Help! Somebody help!" I screamed, hoping someone in the hallway might hear me. He covered my mouth with his hand, muffling my cries. "Shut up," he hissed. "No one's coming." Panic surged through me. I bit down on his hand as hard as I could. He yelped in pain and loosened his grip. I took the chance to break free, bolting for the door. I flung it open and ran down the hallway, not looking back. The elevator was at the far end, but I didn't want to wait. I spotted the stairwell and dashed inside, taking the steps 2 at a time. My heart pounded as I reached the lobby. The clerk looked up, startled by my disheveled appearance. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Someone's in my room." I gasped. "Call the police." He grabbed the phone, dialing quickly. "Are you hurt?" he asked, glancing at me with concern. I shook my head, trying to catch my breath. "No, but he's dangerous." He had a key card to my room. Minutes later, the police arrived. They went up to my room and found it empty. The man was gone, leaving my belongings scattered across the floor. They took my statement and assured me they would investigate, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The hotel offered me a different room, but I declined. I packed my things and checked out, deciding to find another place to stay. As I drove away, the rain still pouring down, I couldn't stop thinking about how easily things could have gone differently. I spent the next few nights looking over my shoulder, jumpy at every sound. The police never found the man, and I never got answers about how he got my key card. I've stayed in countless hotels since, but I always double-check the locks and keep a weapon within reach. It was a night like any other, except for the relentless rain hammering against my windows. I was working late in my home office, trying to finish up a project that had me behind schedule. The storm outside was so loud that it drowned out everything else, making it hard to focus. The occasional flash of lightning would light up the room, only to be swallowed by darkness again. Around midnight, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but I was expecting a call from a client, so I picked it up. The voice on the other end was rough, almost like it was distorted by static. "Jenna," the voice said, "I know what you did." My heart skipped a beat. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, then the voice said, "You don't need to play dumb. You know exactly what I'm talking about." I felt a chill run down my spine. I had no idea who this person was or what they were referring to. "I think you've got the wrong number," I said. The voice laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Don't play games with me. I know about the emails you've been sending. I know about your secret meetings. I hadn't been sending any emails I shouldn't have. And as for secret meetings, there were none." I felt a growing panic. "Listen, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to hang up now." Before I could, the call ended. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. I tried calling back, but the number was disconnected. I felt uneasy but tried to push it aside. Maybe it was just a prank. But then the calls kept coming. Every time I answered, the caller would say something that made no sense or repeated vague threats. They knew details about my life, my job, my routines, even the names of a few friends. It was unsettling, to say the least. I tried to trace the calls, but the number always came up as blocked or unavailable. My attempts to block the number didn't work. They just kept calling from different ones. The feeling of being watched was growing stronger. After an hour of this, I noticed something odd. Every now and then, I'd see a shadow moving past the window when the lightning flashed. I tried to dismiss it as the effect of the rain or my imagination. But as the night dragged on, the feeling of dread only intensified. I decided to check outside. I carefully peeked out through the curtains, trying not to draw attention. The rain was coming down in sheets, and visibility was almost zero. I didn't see anyone, but the feeling that someone was out there, hiding in the dark, was almost palpable. I went back inside, trying to calm myself. I locked all the doors and windows, and the calls continued. The caller seemed to be enjoying my fear, taunting me with personal details and telling me that my time was running out. I knew I had to do something. I called the police, but they told me to stay on the line and keep them updated if anything happened. They said they'd send someone over as soon as they could, but it might take a while given the storm. I felt alone, stranded, and vulnerable. Suddenly, a loud thud came from the back of the house. I jumped, my heart racing. I grabbed a flashlight and a baseball bat I kept for protection. The power flickered, and I knew the storm was causing disruptions. I went to the back door, shining the flashlight outside. The rain was coming down so hard that it was difficult to see anything. I carefully opened the door and stepped out, the mud squishing beneath my shoes. The backyard was empty, but I noticed a set of muddy footprints leading from the edge of the yard to the back door. They looked fresh, and the sight made my blood run cold. I quickly went back inside, locked the door, and called the police again, telling them about the footprints. They promised someone would be there soon. I sat in my office, waiting, the fear making it hard to concentrate. The calls had stopped, but the silence was almost worse. I felt like a sitting duck, waiting for something terrible to happen. After what felt like hours, there was a knock on the door. I hesitated but finally opened it to find two police officers standing there, soaked from the rain. They came in and began to investigate, checking around the property and asking me about the calls and any suspicious activity. As they spoke with me, I felt a bit of relief, but the dread never fully left. They did a thorough search of the area but found no one. They took the details of the calls and the muddy footprints and promised to keep an eye on things. Once they left, I locked up the house and tried to get some sleep. I left a light on and stayed close to my phone, ready to call for help if needed. The storm continued to rage outside, but eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell into a fitful sleep. In the morning, the storm had passed, and the sun was out. The police had not reported any incidents from the night before. The unsettling feeling of being watched began to fade, but I knew I'd be more cautious from now on. The calls eventually stopped, and I never heard from the mysterious caller again.